Boo! Hiss! Boo! I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. We love dynamite parties. And Aiden! Right on time. How y'all doing? I hope y'all are doing well. I do realize I'm starting Mochi Storytime quite late. But one, I wanted to do this, and two, my arm was twisted. So, QED, I'm a masochist. But I hope y'all are doing so well and are ready for some story time today. You did give me the option. I know. I know. I'm just being a goofy bottom. I mean, you know me. I like being a goofy bottom. All right. Okay, so we have a lot of stuff to cover today. So we should probably get started with that, shouldn't we? So last time we finished all the stuff that PikamasterADV had written for the story. And then we started the stuff that I had written. Now for the rest of this story, the rest of the story will have been written by me. So you're gonna be seeing 100% Mochi stuff. You know? 100% Mochi stuff. So, yeah, and also I do need to warn everyone. I've written a lot. The first chapter I'll be reading for you today will be the shortest. At 40 minutes long, which is already about maybe twice as long as a lot of the other chapters on average. I know. I'm sorry, Orville. I apologize. I can't help it! Every other chapter, though, will probably take at least 1 hour to finish. Because the one after this one will probably be about 70 minutes. Then on the one after that will be about 60. Then the one after that will probably be 70. And then finally 60 again. So in total, we're looking at possibly 5 total hours of story. That is probably not going to be doable to finish all tonight. I'll tell you that much. So what I plan on doing is I found a place where I can end stream. Kind of a cliffhanger of sorts, though not really. It's something that I feel like it's a pretty good place to end on. But even so, it's This is a lot of stuff. So, one, I apologize ahead of time, and two, screw you, I write a lot. So, let's honestly, let's get right to it. Oh man, this feels so weird. I've only stalled for 10 minutes. Or 5 minutes, I guess, because the first 5 minutes was for the startup thing. So, it feels so weird starting early. What is happening here? I know, right? It's not a cliffhanger per se. A real cliffhanger would be for me to end it like the chapter before I plan on ending it. That would be a cliffhanger. It's like Alexander Hamilton writing a lot. Thank you, Orville. I still need to see Hamilton. I have not. That's I feel like that's one of the, it feels like everyone has seen that, but it's also like, I feel like it's one of the hardest plays to watch. Because it's like, it's always booked. You know what I mean? Alright, but anyway. Okay, let's get started. I've stalled enough. 11 minutes. Must be a new record. New speed record. We're getting faster. May's Crush, Final Frontier, Denouement. By me! Chapter 38, Throwing Down the Gauntlet. Wait, hold on. Okay, you're saying I write like I'm running out of time, but you didn't think that fit? No, I don't know. I think that could fit. Yeah, but yeah, stalling spear on new PDB. Let's go. Okay, I'm gonna stop now. Chapter 38, Throwing Down the Gauntlet. It had been a few minutes since the door closed behind them, and it was only a couple since they resumed their climb after the initial blindness from the bright lights had faded. None of the girls uttered a word to each other, and the anticipation of the next opponent pressurized the air so much it made the awkward tension between them even worse. May was still having difficulty gathering up the courage to break the silence. The extreme guilt she felt for unloading all those sucker punches on Greta over a day before had refused to leave her. And revisiting that memory and the thought of apologizing for it out of the blue brought her close to hyperventilating more than once. Pikachu, sensing the distress from his caretaker, tried to calm her down however he could, although there was admittedly little he could really do in such an uninviting place. Greta, on the other hand, had more or less moved on. She had way worse beatings than that while training, she recalled. She could still feel the soreness, and she was pretty sure one of May's punches had given her a concussion, but it was nothing she wasn't used to. Yet, for some reason, she could feel the awkward energy coming from her troubled form, and that made her more than a little uncomfortable herself. Though, unlike May, who was closer to perhaps being on the verge of a panic attack, she herself was more antsy. She growled, no longer able to stay quiet, and vented to disperse the choking, unpleasant air. Ah, whose idea was it to make a stupid place like this anyway? Her booming voice echoed howlily up the staircase, which made it clear that they still had quite a ways to go. It wasn't Scott's idea, Annabelle answered matter-of-factly. Her voice had no trace of any of the tension that had plagued the other two, even despite the fact that she was very easily able to sense their feelings directly. My guess is that it was Evergreen who had masterminded the Battle Fortress's design. You mean he spent all this money on this huge advanced building with motion sensors and tech that knows when Pokemon are battling, yet he was too cheap to install a frickin' elevator? Greta retorted in a huff. After a second, though, she sighed in resignation, her stress relieved for the moment. I mean, I guess it's a good cardio workout and all, but still. The brain's banter had continued like this for a while, but it was only the pair who had the courage to speak. There were times May had felt a desire to weigh in and be at least somewhat sociable, granted, but cold feet stilled her tongue. A voice in the back of her head taunted her, all but convincing her that she had no right to fraternize with those she had been antagonistic towards so recently. So, after a few minutes of watching them quip back and forth and enjoy each other's company, she gave up trying. Annabelle broke eye contact with Greta for a moment, to notice that May had been unusually quiet for the past few minutes, however. May, are you alright? She said, her eyes softening in concern. The girl in green broke out of her spell and panically shook her hands. Of course, just Peachy! Annabelle frowned disapprovingly. You know I could tell what you're feeling, right? The sudden realization made her stumble forward, just barely catching herself with the handrail. Pikachu also barely caught onto her shoulder in time and averted what would have been a painful spill onto the cold metal steps. Did you just read my mind without my permission? She asked in a flustered, exasperated tone and clutched her heart. While clutching her heart. Oh no, Annabelle responded with a laugh. Your reaction just now made it obvious. May sighed, not even bothering to put up the facade anymore. Annabelle continued to giggle at her expense and playfully patted her on the back in whatever camaraderie she could display given the circumstances. However, when she didn't reciprocate, she stopped and lowered her hand hesitantly. You're not okay, are you? May shook her head. No. No, I'm not, she responded, her voice raspy and slow. I'm trudging through the dark, not even knowing if my boyfriend is okay, and being forced to leave my friends behind with those I fought or even beat up not even a while ago. Her guilt welled up, especially after she admitted the last part, clearly still not having come to terms with her, kindly speaking, barbaric behavior from before. Greta shook her head. Boy, you're still feeling bad about that? Just move on, May. The blood on your knuckles is dried. There isn't anything else that can be done about it. I can't! Don't you see? Her voice quickened and had a notable rise in firmness, but still had the raspiness of one desperate for a drink. I've done horrible things to you. This whole mission depends on us all being able to trust each other, and I'm... She paused, as the words running through her head seemed harsher than she'd intended and sought to lighten the blow. I just don't see how we can do that. Annabelle and Greta looked at each other in concern, though she couldn't be sure if it was because they were wanting to argue back or were caught off guard from her so pointedly saying what they were feeling. So you don't trust us? Greta asked her. Not really in a negative or shocked tone or anything that signaled offense, but it was still one that gave her pause. And so Maid hesitated for a moment before answering. Well, I'm not gonna lie and say that I don't have some doubts deep down. After all, she knew how many times they seemingly rushed through a revolving door of lying and betraying her and couldn't help but be left wondering if it was still spinning. But with how you're helping me now, I can't help but feel that you've settled on a side. And so if anything were to make me feel guiltier, it would be abandoning you. So no, she said, sighing sharply and feeling somewhat relieved from having spoken her part. I do trust you. I just don't see how you can trust me after all that's happened, you know? Greta's pace slowed a bit as she began looking down toward her feet in thought, and eventually she came to a halt, leaning against the handrail and crossing her arms. Listen, May, she began, uncharacteristically gently for her. The things we all do, you, me, Annie, Ash, they don't happen in a vacuum. Not that I'm making excuses, but we all have our reasons for acting the way we do. You have Ash, and it's very clear that you love him very much. She absentmindedly rubbed her blackened eye and continued. You may just be a goody two-shoes trying to save her man, but that's exactly why I trust you. Your reasons for your actions are clear as day. We, on the other hand, did do some pretty bad stuff to Ash for our own selfish ends. Plus, there was the whole helping Team Rocket take over the Sevii Islands thing. So if anyone has reason to be distrustful, it is you. After having been watching silently from the side for the past few minutes, Annabelle stepped up and patted the arena tycoon on the shoulder. You know, Greta, she interjected with a smile, you've been strangely introspective and thoughtful of other people's feelings in the past couple of days, haven't you? The blonde blushed and crossed her arms with a frown. Oh, cork it, Annie. The pair laughed for a couple seconds, and even May couldn't help but chip in a giggle or two their way as well. Perhaps it was still the oppressive atmosphere putting her on edge, or the perilous stakes keeping her grounded, but for a moment, she caught herself feeling a rapport with the other girls. It felt almost as though they had been companions for years, and so the biting loneliness that had been gnawing at her briefly subsided. She took a deep breath and let out some of the building emotional exhaustion out of her lungs. So, she said somewhat nervously, but also with a renewed sense of confidence and purpose. Are we cool? Of course we are, Annabelle said, smiling, with Greta weighing in with a nod of her own in solidarity. Greta's right. We mustn't keep dwelling on villainizing our past selves. We're a team now, and you can trust us with that. You guys, was all that May could mutter. a lacrimal smile forming on her face. She was touched, to put it mildly, to see those she was once antagonistic towards to be following her lead so willingly in her hour of need. She giggled to herself in the realization that she had perhaps just been worrying over nothing. For now, though, while her breath still ran fast from the constant climbing, she was more at peace. At least for a moment, she could at last feel a small weight lift from her shoulders. Incidentally, the weight lifting from her shoulders was literally small. With a sudden twitch of his ears, Pikachu jumped off May's shoulder and ran ahead up the stairs. May, surprised, called his name, but as was typical of the electric mouse, he didn't stop for anyone. Then it was clear to her. They were there. Also, Xenoblade 3 has started, Violet. How messed up is it so far? All you need to do is, like, just see, like, the first 5 or 10 minutes. That's all it took for me to be like, wow, this is really messed up. But it is a masterpiece of a game, so enjoy it. Oh, it is so good. The doorway leading to the next room itself was identical to every other one they'd encountered. It was just a rectangular opening and had nothing particularly special or eye-catching about it. Beyond that was a battlefield, also practically indistinguishable from the last two. It was a style of design that had, at that point, grown stale and almost sterile and devoid of any care or attention to detail. It was a by-the-books, default, neutral field, utterly boring to anyone without a trained appreciation for the art of battling itself. Perhaps it was for the best, then, that none of the stadiums were equipped with any spectator seating that gave people a false impression, May thought to herself dryly. The group followed Pikachu down the field until he suddenly braked. Dust settled behind him as he slid to a halt, his cheeks angrily sparking with electricity. Up ahead, another light illuminating the opposite door, May's goal, had caught their eye, as well as a couple more shadowy figures standing in the opposing trainer space. Another loud noise nearly startled me out of her skin as the stadium lights turned on, but her feet somehow managed to disobey the rest of her body's instinct to dash right back through the door she came from. She couldn't run, not when she was so close to the end. And so the next opponent's forms were revealed to her without delay in the white light. It was Pyramid King Brandon and Dome Ace Tucker. Pikachu was undeterred from the sudden change in lighting and hardly even seemed to notice the girls that walked up and stood at his side. He clawed at the loose soil beneath their feet, threatening to pounce at the slightest twitch of movement. Neither Tucker nor Brandon took the saber rattling as any real threat, however, and simply ignored the yellow mouse. "So, you finally arrived," Tucker called out to the girls. "I personally was expecting you here sooner, but far be it from me to complain about the extra prep time." May and Annabelle were surprised to once again see Tucker face off against them. Sure, he had a few scratches and bumps on his face here and there from their last scuffle, but his attire was as pristine and flashy as it always was. Besides those, he was clearly in a better condition physically and mentally than the Pipe Queen before them. The only one among them who didn't have any visibly shocked reaction was Greta, but instead crossed her arms and growled. "You don't know when to quit, do you?" she grumbled, her voice dripping with acid. Tucker laughed in a shrill voice. "Upset that you didn't expect me to take advantage of your mercy back at the dotted hole? This is war, sweetheart." "War?" Greta snapped back, the frustration in her voice made manifest. "It's perfidy, that's what it is!" Tucker, unrepentant at angering the other brain so, simply raised his hands half-heartedly. "Call it whatever you want. Doesn't change the fact that they were just the words of someone too stubborn to admit she found herself out-strategized." May speechlessly gaped at the golden hair brain. She vividly recalled Greta quickly apprehending him with a swift kick to the feet and giving the rest of them an opportunity to pass through. It was not only expertly done, but it was also a pleasant surprise. She had doubt that the Arena Tycoon even wanted to ally herself with her and her friends after everything that had happened prior. Yet, she still did it, and since then, despite feeling discomfort around her, May could never seriously question her allegiances. However, even this she found a little odd. Tucker was nowhere to be seen after Greta had rescued the group from the cave-in, that much she remembered. And now that she thought about it, she never did hear her mention what she did with them. What really happened back there? Greta clenched her fists so hard that May was afraid that they would bleed, and fire erupted from her eyes. May, hoping to at least distract her from charging up to the man and decking him herself, lightly put a hand on her shoulder to get her attention. Greta, what's he talking about? Her rage had evaporated, if only for a moment. She took a deep breath and stared at her feet, still glaring. I kinda let him go after he promised he'd return to Kanto. Before anyone else had a chance to respond, her palm quickly flew toward her head, and a loud smack echoed in the stadium. Yeah, I'm an idiot, I know, but I just couldn't kill him! So I thought maybe I could convince him, and then that earthquake happened, and you guys were trapped inside, and I had no time to hold him to the deal, so I had to drop him and go off to help you, and it's so frustrating! Her rage had returned. She grabbed a fistful of hair and pulled hard. Annabelle intervened as quickly as she could, instructing her arms with a tight hug to keep her hands from claiming more strands than they already had. Greta, it'll be okay, she assured her. I know I wasn't there, but I know you did the best you could. Just please calm down. The gambit seemed to have worked, at least from May's point of view. Greta loosened her grip on her hair and let her arms rest in Annabelle's embrace. Her face, while still glaring, had softened slightly and grew such a nice shade of red that she desperately hoped the lavender-haired girl wouldn't notice. Whether she actually did or not was anyone's guess, and it didn't matter. It didn't much matter when Tucker opened his mouth to lob another taunt her way. Perhaps it's too much to expect the one who hands out gut symbols to depend on anything but her gut. You do some good to get that muscle in your head some stretching, you know. Greta struggled against Annabelle's grip with renewed vigor, her rage re-flaring in a blaze. Annabelle struggled harder, though, and somehow managed to keep her from breaking free and starting an impromptu brawl. After a few seconds of fruitless squirming, she relaxed her muscles once more, before looking up to face the dome ace and spitting, "You're despicable." To this, Tucker simply shrugged. Well, what are you gonna do about it, Are you gonna throw a tantrum, or do you want to settle this as adults? Greta, growling loudly, freed her hand from Annabelle's grip and reached for her belt. She grabbed one of her Pokeballs and let it fly free. You're up, Medicham! She bellowed. A beam of light flashed from the flying ball and revealed the red and gray form of her Meditate Pokemon, who, sensing from its trainer the insatiable desire to inflict agony, took a focused stance in opposition to the two men standing before them. So the latter, then, Tucker replied with a devilish grin. Now you're speaking my language! He tossed a ball of his own into the ring, and in another flash of light, a large radiant canine appeared and faced Greta's Medicham head-on, snarling. Annabelle let go when she was sure that Greta wasn't going to jump in and join the melee herself. It was probably for the best, too, as her relatively undeveloped arms were holding the grip for so long that she feared they'd have snapped. While massaging her wrists, she glanced over to the other side of the field and realized that Brandon had not said a word since they reached that floor. His face had been locked into the perennial scowl that more or less defined him, but nothing in his emotions or body language indicate that he was even all that interested in fighting to begin with. Instead, he had his arms crossed and glaring eyes closed, almost as though he had been listening to music in his ear the entire time. You're gonna tell me a tree joke, but then you got stumped? Okay, now that's a good one. I like that one, Orville. Leave me alone, I'm bushed! It's funnier when Uncle tells it. Tucker's starting to annoy me like Harley. Not as much, Grant, but he's getting there. Oh boy, wow. I mean, he is insufferable, no? And yeah, Greta is about to go Super Saiyan. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah! Sorry. Sorry, I had to take a drink. Just a little bit, yeah? Well, good, that's the intention. I did that on purpose. I mean, I'm guessing that's what PikamasterADV was going for, so, you know, I'm just kind of continuing the tradition, as it were. But anyway. Brandon, Annabelle called, which immediately startled the Pyramid King. So what are you doing here? Do you intend to let everyone know what Evergreen put you up to? It didn't take long for him to quite predictably, respond with, "No!" Even so, the sound was like nails on a chalkboard, and it took all her might to keep herself from cringing. Greta had less restraint, rolling her eyes and muttering irritably to herself, "Oish, could you maybe chew gum instead of the scenery for once in your life?" There's little need for discussion and little time. Evergreen's orders were to put the traitors in line after they arrived, and I dragged along the lowest ranked mook I could get my hands on to help out. Tucker's eye twitched. "Don't think me as just mere help," he grumbled angrily. Brandon's patience had worn thin. Bite your tongue," he lashed, with such a threatening aura emanating from him that he might as well have silently appended, "or else." Tucker got the ultimatum loud and clear, albeit not without a lack of protest. He turned away from his partner, puffing and tapping his foot in annoyance, but besides that, he didn't dare utter another word. Then May, who had herself been unusually silent, decided to speak up. Curious, she asked Brandon in the firmest voice she could despite her fear and nerves. "Tell us, what have you been doing for this Evergreen?" "None of your business." Well, so much for that, she thought to herself. Whether he was unwilling to divulge due to orders or simply because he didn't want to, she couldn't tell. But even so, why? There was nothing he would be able to withhold from the public for long, with the inevitability of the brain's disappearance and Team Rocket's actions in the Sevii Islands becoming common knowledge. So why the reticence then and there? May took the time before the sparks would start flying to ponder it, but she couldn't divine much. Maybe it was like Lucy. Perhaps he wanted to keep it secret because he felt like it had to be kept secret. It was easy to see why for the former. She wanted to preserve her reputation, and at any cost. However, the latter didn't seem to care much for reputation, only archaeology and ruins. So what could it have been? By then, it was clear that Brandon would not be the one to play the town herald. If she wanted to get to the bottom of everything, Evergreen was the only person who could provide answers. And so May's sights were set for the door, at the opposite end of the room. Well, there's no cracking Brandon, no matter what. No point in asking. Yeah, he's not cracking here. Annabelle sensed May's intent to book it past everyone and climbed the next staircase, and put her hand on her shoulder in support. "Go," she whispered in her ear. "This is the last floor before you reach the top. You'll see Ash again soon, I promise. Greta and I will make sure your path to the door is clear, but after that, you'll be on your own, I'm afraid." May nodded, understanding the situation all too well. She knew that, like all the other floors before them, she would have to leave them behind. This time, though, there was nothing holding her back. Mouthing a silent thank you, she took off with all the speed her legs could handle, sprinting the fastest she'd ever have in her life. Pikachu, noting that his caretaker was still defenseless, broke his glare directed at the male brains and followed closely behind her. Unfortunately, but probably expectedly, the sudden movement prompted Brandon and Tucker's attention to immediately shift to the girl. Tucker, enraged, orders our canine to attack her with a flamethrower. Brandon followed suit. "Reggie Ice, I need your assistance!" May could see light flash behind her, and the shrill sound of one of the legendary titans materializing. But even so, she kept running, even as our canine began inhaling for its attack. "Reggie Ice, stop her in her tracks with Ice Beam!" May shivered, knowing that at any second she would be immolated and then frozen in short order. Her breath quickened, her heartbeat got faster, sweat was dripping from her forehead, and visions of her past flicked in and out of existence. So she ran faster. Soon, however, she panicked when she noticed the door still was not opening. Before long, she would have nowhere left to run, and she would be chased relentlessly until she succumbed to exhaustion, or worse. But she kept running anyway. Eventually, she did reach the door, which was still closed tight and refused to budge. She banged her fist on the cold steel, crying in frustration when nothing happened. In the corner of her eye, she could see that the light before had not dissipated, and she could feel the simultaneous heat and cold headed straight for her back. It's official, she thought. I'm doomed. She closed her eyes, expecting the blast of fire and ice to hit her any second. It was so hot and so cold. She would burn alive, and her well-done corpse would be preserved in an icy coffin for eternity. She clenched her teeth and hoped that it would at least be painless. Except nothing happened. The heat and cold mix equalized her room temperature rather quickly, and no attack ever came. She opened her eyes and built the courage to look behind her. When she did, she was relieved to see that a wall of light had been erected between her and her attackers. Farther off in the distance, she saw Annabelle's Espeon standing roughly where she was just a few moments earlier. It didn't take much for me to put 2 and 2 together. Satisfied with the quick interception with light screen, Annabelle glared at the 2 men standing opposite her and Greta. "I can't believe you!" she shouted. "Attacking an unarmed challenger directly? Are those the orders Evergreen told you to follow?" "What, do you expect to just let her go and spill the beans and everything when she finds out about what we've been doing?" Tucker retorted. "Tucker's right, for once," Brandon sneered, to which Tucker scoffed and rolled his eyes. "We're in damage control right now, and that means filling in any crack from where leaks can happen. To put it bluntly, she's seen too much. You want the battle frontier to survive this, don't you? Not if it gives you the mandate to attack people without propagation or warning. There are rules to follow, you know." "Rules?" Brennan asked with a scoff. Have you ever stopped to wonder why the Battle Fortress was designed the way it was in the first place? Do you think it was just to provide a simple gimmick to keep things fresh and interesting and exciting for the crowds and give a challenge to only the best? He shook his head in disdain when all he got from both girl brains was blank stares. No. There's one reason why someone would be possessed to architect something so twisted, and one reason only. So that no one can possibly win. May, who had just started coming down from her adrenaline high and near-death experience, had difficulty following. Fortunately, Annabelle took initiative to probe further, as though she had difficulty processing it herself. What do you mean? Are you saying that the only reason the Battle Fortress exists is so it can be an unbeatable facility? That's exactly what I mean. From there, it's clear that the concept of rules is meaningless in an unwinnable game. But why? Why create something so impossible to win? And that, Brandon said, motioning Regice to switch his aggro to the Sun Pokemon, is again none of anyone's business. At least Brandon used Regice, with Greta using Medicham, at least that gives him a chance to win, and Espeon should be able to 1v1 Arcanine. Yeah, but again, the battle itself doesn't matter, or the outcome of the battle doesn't matter, just that the fight happens. Because that's the only way for the doors to open. Then, Greta had had enough. Oish! We're not running it! We're getting nowhere with these people! Annie, we need to shut up and fight! It frustrated her, but she agreed. The only way forward for anyone was to get that door open. So there was only one thing she could do. Espeon, use Psychic on Arcanine! As soon as the wave of energy enveloped the bulking quadruped, it was clear the real battle had begun. The building sensors agreed, as a loud grinding sound made its way into May's ears from behind. The door had begun to open. Come on, Pikachu! She commanded the electric mouse. After he said a Pika in acknowledgement, the pair hurried into the darkened stairway, and not long after they had crawled through the threshold, the door slammed shut behind them. Like before, they could hear no sounds or feel any rumbles from the fight that had started. There was no way to tell if Annabelle and Greta were going to be fine, or really any way to see how they were doing. For all she knew, they would share the same fate that she herself almost faced, and there would be no way to know until it was too late. Worse still, while leaving them behind did leave a pain in her heart, she found it more alarming just how much easier doing so was actually becoming. The thoughts of reuniting with Ash and clearing up all answers by talking to the mastermind himself had preoccupied her completely, and guilt and doubt soon replaced her feelings of sadness. Was this the right thing to do? Was she selfish for so easily discarding them when it was convenient to do so? Yeah, the door wasn't opening because technically the fight hadn't started. They were focusing their attack on May, not on another Pokemon. And so, as soon as Espeon put up a light screen to stop it, Tucker and Brandon knew that they could keep focusing on May if they wanted, but then they'd just be left completely vulnerable to Greta and Annabelle, and we all know how much Greta wanted to just completely beat up Tucker, right? So, you know. I would say it was a Mexican standoff, but that implies that everyone was aiming at each other. So I don't know what the precise sort of term for it, but I guess it would be kind of like in Splatoon, or like another like team shooter where like, you know, you could focus your attention on someone in the back. Or like, you could focus your attention on someone like in front of you, but if there's someone flanking you, they're just going to be able to pick you off if you're not paying attention. So, that was basically their reason for like, okay, you know what? I guess we might as well just start this fight then, instead of just continuing to attack her, you know? Why am I explaining this in detail? I have no idea. I guess maybe it's because I wrote this and I guess I kind of know the motivations there, but I don't know. Anyway. Oh, they absolutely should win that battle, because Regice has no physical defense, and Arcanine doesn't have the best special defense. And with Espeon being able to use Light Screen, and Medicham having pure power, they're definitely the stronger side. That is true! That is true, yes. So yeah, they should be fine. But, as, you know, as May had considered as well, there's no way of actually knowing. Since, you know, the door closed behind her, and it's soundproof, so she can't even, like, hear anything going on. It's just completely sealed off. So, you know, anxious brain and all that can definitely, the anxious brain is better at scaring oneself than, like, any actual monster can. At least better than Brock fighting a Milotic with my goat steal. True, but again, it doesn't. Again, the outcome of the battle doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter who wins or loses, from the perspective of the doors opening. So, I mean, he could have opened up with Bonsai, really, and the effect would have still been the same. The door would have still opened. And in fact, if he were running the Gauntlet himself, he may have actually done that first anyway. Because the optimal strategy is to leave behind your weakest first. But, of course, since we have a whole party of a bunch of different people here, we have multiple parties of Pokemon instead of just the one. That didn't have to happen, so. But yeah, I guess in a way I just wanted, I don't know, I guess I just wanted to write some Steelix stuff. I guess that's probably the main reason why I did that. I don't know. And also, you know, there's also, like, the parallel, because they're both, you know, serpentine Pokemon, in a sense, you know what I mean? So. Weakest against weakest, strong against strongest. Yep. So. But yes. Anyway, back to the cartoon.
I did not dab, I did not. Oh, hi, Mark.
Oh, hi, Mark. Thank you, Orville. Pikachu, ever so observant toward Caretaker's feelings of late, hopped onto her shoulder and tried to comfort her however he could. He cooed into her ear as if to say, "This is the only way. Don't worry about them. They can hold their own just fine." May sighed, still doubtful. Pikachu, what would Ash do in this situation? Pikachu took a moment to think before responding. He started slow and contemplative before quickening the pace of his speech. She couldn't be sure, but she thought he said something along the lines of, "Well, probably the same as you. He never gives up on his friends or Pokemon. When I was gravely injured when we first met, he did all he could to protect me from that flock of Spearow and deliver me to Viridian City to get healed." May had already heard that story a few times offhand in the past, but it was still a welcome one to think about in such an oppressive environment. "Like you, I know he would have refused to leave anyone behind," Pikachu continued. "But he knew that if it was the only way, he would go to any lengths to help his friends. Ash has rubbed off on you after all this time. I know you're only doing what he would have done, so please don't feel discouraged. I'm here with you. Maybe it was just her projecting onto someone else or putting words in his mouth. But regardless of whether or not that was what he was actually saying, it helped her at least a little. At that point, while she had left everyone behind, she would never be truly alone. Ash was never far from where Pikachu was, and that sense of proximity was quite comforting. Even more so now that she still had someone to talk to in order to get her mind off her anxiety for the next few moments. She smiled, her drive to climb reinvigorated. Thank you, Pikachu. I think I'm ready now. Pikachu gave her a Pika in approval and held on tight to her shoulder as she began her final climb. Every step she took, however, despite the newfound will to reach the top, she felt her legs shake more and more before she had to use the handrails to keep her balance. The pressure in the air didn't let up any since she got there. An oddity, considering how high up she must have been by then, and so her breathing quickened to stave off the lightheadedness. She was thirsty and hungry, and she could hardly wait to have another scalding shower when she was reunited with everyone. It amused her to think that perhaps the promise of food and drink gave her as much motivation as the thought of seeing Ash again did, but she didn't want to think of much else beyond that. For once, she found her happy medium of appreciating the situation's gravity and feeling confident that everything would be okay after all. The pair continued up the stairs for a few minutes, not saying much to each other after the pep talk earlier. Pikachu's gaze shifted from wall to wall and step to step, absorbing as much as he could of the admittedly uninteresting architecture in case anything was out of place. Like a death trap hiding in the shadows, perhaps. May, on the other hand, kept her focus on the next few steps that she could actually see in the dim light, taking care to not trip a third time. Soon, however, Pikachu's ears twitched, and he once again jumped off May's shoulder to run off ahead. They were getting close. May picked up her pace, her nerves causing every part of her body to shake profusely. After tripping a 6th time, she ended up scraping her knee, but she ignored the pain and got back up to continue her jog up the stairs. Before long, she reached the doorway and saw a room quite unlike the others before it. While it was spacious and had clear standard battlefield markings like the others, it had more of the vibes of a laboratory more than anything else. There were no bright lights that flipped on like before, so the room remained lit only by the glow of monitors that dotted the walls, and a large projector at the end displaying 2 empty boxes, probably meant for trainer portraits, and a timer set to 000. The battlefield itself was caged within the larger room in a box made of tempered glass, while the rest of the area was roomy enough to comfortably look inward, as a sort of makeshift spectator area. However, in lieu of bleachers and other seat analogs, unmanned desktop computers were arrayed outside, as if to observe unfolding battles, not for amusement, but strictly for data analysis. Pipes lined the ceiling with some of them leaking steam, most likely just for heating purposes. She could hear the condensed steam falling and making a steady rhythmic drip, drip, drip noise as it pelted the top of the tempered glass box like a light rain. At the end of the room, underneath the score projection, there was an outcropping of a wall that appeared to serve as a stage of sorts. Structure towers lined the top and held aloft spotlights and loudspeakers that had not yet turned on. May waited for a few moments with bated breath. Unlike before, nothing was reacting to their mere presence there. For all she knew, they were the only ones even in the room, and a part of her was even starting to believe that maybe she had taken a wrong turn somewhere to begin with. Panic started to well in her, and desperate for anything to happen, she called out to the darkness. Hello? Is there anyone there? For a moment, she was afraid that her call fell on deaf ears, but after a few seconds, she found herself startled by a loud mechanical lift rising from the top of the stage at the end of the room, before eventually clanging to a complete stop. From there, she could see the lone figure of a man staring at her. Ash, perhaps? A hardened look at him told her no, there was no way. The man's hair was short and slicked back, and though it was dark in color, it was not quite as black like Ash's was. His attire, too, was also far more formal than how he would normally dress. He was wearing a suit and tie, his white vest seeming to glow in the murky darkness. His face was chiseled and exuded confidence and cruelty, so much so that May's knees weakened from intimidation. Yes, definitely not Ash. His look of confidence swiftly turned to incredulity, and then what appeared to be anger, like he had seen the ghost of someone who had slighted him in the past. So it's true! the man said with abrasion in his voice. You did survive. May cleared her throat before responding to make sure it wouldn't crack out a feeler. Who are you? I am the administrator of this facility, young lady. You may call me Evergreen. All right, and that's that chapter. And that did take about 40 minutes. Well, technically a little bit less than 40 minutes. Ash should fight a Milotic with a Charizard, fight a Regice with Arcane, and Arcanine with Sceptile. You know, the usual ass stuff. Yeah, he would, because, you know, he's Team Instinct, man! Hard work and determination. And plot armor. Yeah. Alright, so that is the end of that chapter. So now, chapter 39, 'Tis better to love and never lose. Oh boy, she's about to face with Giovanni. Oh boy, it's about to go down. It's about to go down! Oh boy! Alright, let us begin. Of course, like I do have to change tabs, though. May always looked forward to the moment she'd face the man behind the whole conspiracy with a great deal of dread. Although, for the most part, much of it was simply a result of not knowing what to expect. Part of her had imagined he would have adhered more to a villain stereotype, like with a mysterious mask or a cape or something. Here, he was more publicly presentable, like the president of a company. Far cry from the embodiment of pure evil she had envisioned. Yet the way he carried himself, coupled with the oppressive atmosphere and his fierce expressions, only amplified her fear despite the disconnect. She felt herself crumpling from the pressure, as though gravity itself had doubled, and she had to resist all desire to shield her eyes. So, you must be May, said the man, who had referred to himself as Evergreen, after a minute of waiting for the girl to get over her hesitation to speak. After all the ordeals you've endured the past few days, I can't imagine you've come all this way just to greet me with a blank stare. The man still appeared to have been grappling with a revelation, as he refused to take his eyes off her, barely even believing what they were showing him. It did little to obstruct his speech, however, as his words flowed with a clarity fit for an orator. May, on the other hand, was less eloquent, but it wasn't as though she had to impress anyone, nor that she even cared to. She violently shook her head to break her so-called blank stare and, against her better judgment, stopped forward to get a better look. We have a lot to talk about, Mr. Evergreen. He raised his hand. Just Evergreen will suffice. Right, whatever. A lot of insistence regarding a name that she knew wasn't even his to begin with. Nevertheless, she thought it best to humor him, lest she found herself denied answers in her interrogation. Or worse, angering the boss of Kanto's infamous criminal organization himself. Evergreen, then, she acquiesced. I have a bunch of questions for you. He smiled, clearly unconcerned with her accusatory tone. Well, we're hardly pressed for time. By all means, ask me any questions you desire. Time for business. First of all, what have you done with Ash? The man chuckled. Getting to brass tacks already? Well, I can assure you that he's safe and sound. No need to worry about your pretty little face about it. May, for a moment content with being told something she wanted to hear, sighed in relief. Yet a small part of her still nagged her and kept her from being completely at ease. She could never be sure if he was even telling the truth to start with. I'm happy to hear that, but... She paused, unsure if she was about to tread on ground that she shouldn't. Even so, something still bothered her about when she last saw Ash. The look in his eyes were completely devoid of the compassion she knew they had before, and his voice had dripped with a malice that had not passed his lips in all the time she knew him. Refusing to hold back, she continued. That's not exactly what I mean. He looked nonplussed, but he didn't seem to particularly mind her prodding. What did you mean, then? He wasn't himself. I saw him do terrible things. Burning Scott's house down, wanting to kill him, and threatening to attack us when we tried to stop him? That's not the Ash I know! Scott? The creative head of the battle frontier. So he wasn't going to completely play dumb. That certainly eliminated the need for more introductions at the very least. You're throwing around a directory of names of interest, but what do any of them have to do with me? What is it that you accuse me of? I know by now that you've been providing Scott funding, and now recently you've been trying to kill him. She swallowed, resisting the shivers running down her spine. And you put Ash up to this, didn't you? Do you mean to say that I somehow convinced your little goody-two-shoes boyfriend to assassinate another human being? To this, Evergreen simply laughed, his bellowing voice fiercely bouncing off the walls and making the glass cage vibrate with a shrill hum. Now that is a tall tale if I've ever heard one. May was growing indignant. Well, it's true, isn't it? Answer me this, he prompted her with a quick, unamused frown after his laughter had ceased. Why, pray tell, would I jeopardize my good name and my organization's research by asking an innocent kid to pick off such a high-profile target? I don't know, May asked rhetorically. Maybe it's because he's been trying to sabotage that whole network machine business? His eyes slightly narrowed. What has he told you about that? It's less what he told me than what I saw. She proceeded to explain what she found over the past few days. The fact that Celio's network machine had been destroyed, the brain's insistence on finding the 2 gemstones needed for it, the mass disappearance and imprisonment of one island, an additional emphasis on the arson of Scott's house. I've been to many of the islands, and I've seen firsthand what you've done. Everything that has happened, it's just obvious by now that you're the one behind it. Evergreen sighed, shaking his head. I wonder if the whole archipelago knows about it by now. You're not denying it? I do admit I need an array of network machines to do my work, and yes, perhaps I've been a bit overzealous in my attempts to acquire the necessary materials. And yes, Scott's meddling has been troublesome. May scanned the man's face, and saw that he was speaking as though he were reading from a prepared speech, completely at ease. But I didn't make an attempt on his life. Nor did I bring your sweet Ash to do it. To insinuate such as a very bold claim indeed. And since I have a motive even, but have you any evidence? Without that, who do you think the authorities would believe? The whimsical fancies of a hormonal teenager? May knew he was behind it, no matter what defense he used. Yet all she could do was growl at him, conceding his point. Indeed, she had no evidence to speak of besides hearsay. It was a tough point for her to let go of, but let go she did, deciding against wasting her breath and time pursuing what would only be a dead end. Okay, Loki, you're doing a good Giovanni impression. Wait, really? I have to admit, it's been a long time since I've seen, like, I've heard anything, like, any scene where Giovanni speaks. Like, I haven't seen Pokemon the first movie or Mewtwo Returns in, like, decades at this point. So I need to change that. Okay, no, it's not decades, but, you know, it's been a decade, probably. So, you know, so I'm doing the best that I can. But yes, a bit overzealous. Sure, buddy. Yeah. Yeah. Just a little wee bit too excited to do what he needs to do. You know, just a little bit overeager. Now then, Evergreen said when it was clear that the girl had run out of ammo to debunk him. What's your next question? The last line of inquiry deflating so heavily took a significant amount of wind out of her sails to follow it up with another. That, coupled with the oppressive atmosphere, made it difficult to focus on any one thing in particular. Despite the high stakes, she felt like she had gone clothes shopping, head dizzy from shifting attention from one item to the next, and feet sore from the choice paralysis that had kept her firmly rooted in place. After a long, embarrassing moment of deciding on a topic, she opened her mouth, practically speaking so low it came out as a whisper that even she could barely hear. After being asked to repeat herself, she did so with the same gusto of a puppy yelping while its family was sleeping. Perfectly audible, but with a timidness made explicitly manifest. This place, she chirped, scanning the world outside the glass like a robin in a cage. What is it for? Seemingly disappointed with such a trivial question, he slowly shook his head. You went all this way without knowing its purpose. It's the latest Battle Frontier facility, the Battle Fortress. May glared at him. Don't patronize me, she almost said aloud, but she bit her tongue just in time to change course. That's not what I mean, she instead responded in the most polite manner she could, although doing so did little to mute her irritability. I think it's kind of obvious there's more to this place than meets the eye. Oh? Like what? Her patience had run dry. She heatedly recalled the previous departures from her party, trying desperately to hold back the tears that were threatening to well in her eyes. Everything! She croaked, what would have been a yell had the knot in her throat not been there. There isn't a single battle facility as cruel and cowardly as this. Forcing trainers to be separated from their Pokemon? It's awful! Evergreen, ever the poster child for human empathy, simply rolled his eyes. All this outrage coming from a girl who forces her Pokemon to compete and fight in glorified beauty pageants. Oh, that's rich. I have a Kel here I'd like you to meet. May's urge to kill, or at the very least scream threateningly, had sharply risen despite rather high to start with. And her pool of restraint, while up to that point able to stay her hand, would not sustain for long at the rate he was getting under her skin. She took a deep breath, relaxed her fists, wiped excess moisture from her eyes, and spent some energy simply ignoring his taunts, all the while counting the minutes until she could finally knock him out with a boat oar. Why would you even design a facility like this anyway? What's the appeal? I designed it this way because I had to. Sure, it's rough around the edges, but it isn't as though I came up with it willy-nilly while laughing and twirling an evil mustache. My design intentions are multifaceted. Why did you have to do this then? Well, first and foremost, we wanted to advertise it as the hardest challenge of any Battle Frontier facility. It is called the Battle Fortress, after all. We didn't want just anyone coming in and making a bout for it, oh no. Only those who had successfully acquired all 7 Frontier symbols would be personally invited to challenge it. This facility was designed as a gauntlet to test how trainers could strategize both in and out of battle. By being forced to sacrifice however many Pokemon are needed for a given match, they must carefully choose what Pokemon they want to have and reserve for the fights to come. May stood there, still not quite believing one would regale the design choices of what was essentially a game so callously. What happens to the Pokemon who are left behind? Well, if the challenger wins, they have nothing to worry about. They're practically set to life for boot. They win accolades, future prospects with the Frontier, and maybe even a specialty mug of their favorite Frontier brain if it pleases them. Needless to say, they get their Pokemon back, of course. Until that happens, though, they remain in my custody. So that's what it is. You made it unwinnable on purpose to steal people's Pokemon, didn't you? Evergreen laughed. Unwinnable? You're standing here, aren't you? Only because you let me bring an entire party of people to fight for me. You didn't only expect us. It was almost like you actually wanted us to run the gauntlet. Well, you aren't wrong there. I'll give you that. As to why that is. Just then, the man smiled maliciously, eliciting another severe chill down May's spine. The answer to that is a simple one. Immediately after, she was startled by a sudden clang behind her. A sound so loud, it shook the glass, and her eardrums so much she feared for a moment they both shattered. She turned around to locate it, and saw that what had once been an open doorway to the stairwell was barricaded shut with a steel door identical to the others. You all know too much. May's heart sank when she realized what was happening. It was a trap all along, and they all fell for it. She and Pikachu stood there shocked, scarcely able to process the ramifications, even less able still to seek a way out. The feeling of defeat gnawed at her fingertips and weighed down her feet, and it left behind, in lieu of hope, a wave of dizziness that nearly toppled her to the floor. Why are you doing this? Was all May could muster between claustrophobic gasps for air. You don't expect me to leave all these loose ends untied, do you? Evergreen responded callously, without a shred of compassion. That goes for the traitors, too. So even Annabelle and Greta are to be disposed of, yes. The former's usefulness now moot. Along with that former gym leader friend of yours, that precocious lass, and those 3 blasted buffoons. I've been made aware they've wandered too close to our secrets here as well, so they must also go, I'm afraid. May then felt an overpowering feeling of guilt consume her. The idea to go off and storm the battle fortress to get Ash back was, after all hers. She could have foreseen that it was a possibility that a trap would be in waiting for them, but she ignored it, and all her one-track mind led her to was a gallows. And to make matters worse, she let her friends into it too. Brock, Cindy, Annabelle, Greta, and her reformed Team Rocket. It wasn't a fate any of them deserved. May revolted at the thought of the injustice of being treated worse than the criminals that were under his own ranks. Speaking of traitors, she countered, what about Tucker and Brandon? What makes you think they won't backstab you like they did Scott? Tucker's far too deep into this to dig himself back out unscathed, and he knows it. The man is as desperate as he is flamboyantly vain, and he wouldn't risk packing up and leaving with his reputation in play. Brandon, on the other hand, is a special case. A useful idiot, perhaps you could call him. Or perhaps more accurately, a contractor. We simply have a quid pro quo arrangement, he and I. In exchange for his services and loyalty, I help fund and keep under wraps his ancient Pokemon research. Wait, May interjected, confused yet hopeful at the same time. So he's not actually a Team Rocket member? Oh no, Evergreen laughed. He's just a carbon copy of Scott, completely unable to properly monetize and talents himself, and only able to succeed after having crawled his way to me for a loan. I did agree to help him, of course, but only because I saw the value his research would truly bring. Other than that, he couldn't care less of how I see fit to use him. Then he lightly slapped his forehead, as if a realization had struck. That's probably enough out of me. Wouldn't want to let Brandon's skeletons fall out of the closet, now would we? May sighed, still jittery from the fear of being trapped in a cage with no way out. But she was also disheartened, having come so close to getting to the bottom of what had been bugging her, as she simultaneously felt like she had gotten no further than when she had begun. So what now, Evergreen? She finally said, disappointment and despair laced in her lips. Are you going to kill us now? You silly girl, the man shot back, gently shaking his head. Where did you get the idea that I was going to kill you? Wait, what? That was as far from being disposed, as he put it, as one possibly could, from what she could see. It was simply too good to be true. You're not going to kill us? She asked, relieved but suspicious. His response was gentle but short. No, of course not. Then he paused for a moment to reach into his pocket for something. What it was exactly, May couldn't tell in the dim lighting, although she figured it had to have been a remote control of some kind, as what sounded like a loud sports buzzer filled the air not a moment later. Afterward, a low rumble shook just ahead of where she and Pikachu had stood, revealing a hatch opening in the ground. In its wake, a dark-haired tatty figure was slowly lifted into the glass cage, and had, after the moaning hydraulics come to a halt, faced them with a blank stare. He is! The figure looked all too familiar. He was a young man of about 14 years, perhaps more. His hair, hatless and exposed, was black, unkempt, and it looked like it hadn't been washed in days. His attire fared no better, bearing the image of one who had been years adrift at sea. The blue blessed pants were ripped and singed in multiple places, patches of exposed fat flesh visible underneath. The most striking feature, however, and the one that had most succeeded in impaling May's spirit, was his eyes. Unlike the warm auburn orbs she had become smitten with before, they were cold and lifeless, with the luster of common stone. She could just barely manage to gaze into them without shaking, the darkness from his pupils billowing forth like dark storm clouds. The only light within them she could see was a spark of lightning, the only voice a clap of thunder that had paralyzed her soul. Only after forcing herself to look away did she realize that all it was the occasional involuntary discharge from Pikachu, no doubt as dumbfounded as she was. Ash! She finally managed to say loudly enough to overshadow the sound of her overactive heartbeat. It's you. Are you? She had seen him like this before, she remembered. Not in real life, of course, but the uncanniness made her extremely uncomfortable, especially as the memory of her nightmare days prior had recalled in her mind. Except this time it wasn't a dream. It was real, and something about him was wrong. Very wrong. Despite all the senses in her body demanding she remain alert, she had to confirm it for herself. She took a step forward, and then another. Fear impeded her ability to walk much further, and the panicked water in her eyes had taken away her ability to see the boy clearly. Ash, this isn't funny! You recognize me, don't you? He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for his belt and lifted up a Pokeball, pointing it straight at the electric mouse ahead. What are you? She asked in shock, jumping. Wrong one. What are you? She asked in shock, jumping as soon as she realized what it was he was going to try to do. Return, he finally said, with the same bizarre intonation of an automaton. Then, reflexively, May shouted, Pikachu, dodge! He barely did. To May's relief, the red beam of light that had shot from the ball harmlessly hit the soil where he had been standing. Pikachu took a second Took a second to take a couple gasps for air before resuming his battle-ready stance, in case the boy decided to take another sneaky shot at him. Ash, what are you doing? Snap out of it! It is clear you have decided we should battle, and so we shall, was all he said in response, ignoring her protest. Choose your Pokemon. The familiarity of the situation was not lost on her. In fact, bearing witness to such a grotesque and otherworldly scenario so soon once more only had her more rattled. The cold eyes, the robotic voice, the unresponsiveness to basic commands. The symptoms were identical to Cindy's when she was hypnotized back in the forest. Ash, no! I'm not going to battle you! She knew the objection probably wouldn't have worked, but she wasn't very keen on raising a blade against her lover so soon without at least trying to de-escalate. As expected, however, he didn't relent. Choose your Pokemon. It was all going nowhere fast, May thought to herself. She shot a glare at the man standing on the stage behind him, her teeth clenching so hard they threatened to grind into a fine powder. Evergreen, what did you do to him? The man laughed, amused at seeing the fruits of his handiwork paying off so well. There's one more secret about this place that I hadn't yet told you. Another reason why we made the Battle Fortress such a challenge was because we doubled it as an R&D facility. There were a few locations where we could carry out some of the projects I wanted to pursue without people breathing down our necks, so we had to make do. We also couldn't risk having spanners, like, say, powerful trainers who have just completed the Battle Frontier jeopardize our work so easily if it came to that. Answer the question, Evergreen! May shouted, her teeth still clenched and her eyes still locked in a glare. What did you do to him? Evergreen gave her a confused sort of look, as though May's ignorance had surprised him yet again. Oh, did Scott not tell you? He asked, his tone suggesting feigned concern. The conditions of our agreement to providing him funding for the Battle Frontier included a clause that relinquished all of his authority over the brain's terms of employment to me. She already knew this, of course. And? That authority includes redefining the terms of their employment whenever I wish, including, mandated psychological evaluations for certain ESP-inclined individuals. May couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. While it indubitably was human speech coming out of his mouth, it was a sort of arcane mysticism dressed up in the veneer of science fiction to her ears. Processing it submerged her entirely into a feeling of slipstream, the sort of uncomfortable sensation one experiences after bearing witness to something egregiously twisted, like seeing someone turn into a mouse right before their eyes. The feeling numbed all thought before slowly drowning to the repeated echo in the back of her head, chanting, He experimented on Annabelle. He experimented on Annabelle. He experimented on Annabelle. As you can imagine, he continued, not seeming to have noticed May having temporarily fallen into a stupor. It was quite the endeavor receiving the data necessary to emulate Annabelle's abilities. She was cooperative enough to not show resistance. Well, after a while, anyway. But the real difficulty was understanding their underlying mechanics themselves. Psychic powers aren't quite an exact science. But soon enough, we had a breakthrough, and now generating and manipulating the same ways that she uses is quite trivial. So the reason Ash was on the verge of assassinating Scott and doing your bidding was because you hypnotized him into doing it? Again with the baseless accusations? His urge to kill was completely of his own volition. The poor boy was so heartbroken over your death that he saw no other avenue but to seek justice himself. All I did was give him a nudge, an idea of who was responsible for it, and he took it as gospel. Your boyfriend has quite a vengeful side of him, don't you know? No, she refused to believe it. He had to be lying. There was no way that Ash would succumb to such malevolent actions. He guided himself only by his gut, sure, and was sometimes too bullheaded to trust anything else that disagreed with it. But his gut never told him to harden another individual. Revenge was a term practically absent from his vocabulary, let alone his conscience, so he couldn't have been himself when she heard him such poison-laden bile in front of her. Do you doubt what I say? Evergreen said, snapping her out of her train of thought. When you explained to him your side of the story, did he look unresponsive? Were his eyes glazed over? Can you look at him right now and say what you see before you is how he acted? She couldn't. So that leaves one singular truth. Not only was he of sound mind, he was more resolved than any flimsy meat puppet could ever be. He wanted revenge. He sought my help to get it. He trained with me to prepare for that moment. And in so doing, he became more than capable of carrying out the justice he so desired. And in exchange for my help, became my champion of the Battle Fortress. So things are Things are going down, like we thought they would, right? But also, Aiden, at least you were right, there is no Ho-Oh. True. That is true. Could you imagine if there was? Oh boy. Could you imagine? May's having to face a legendary Pokemon alone. Oh my god. Or Ash riding a legendary Pokemon. Oh my god. Like Plagues and May, he'll use Sceptile to be an easy win for you. Yeah, it's crowd's going down for real, for real. Oh yeah, baby. And so May's hope for Ash's innocence, after cracking under pressure, had finally shattered. She could think of no narrative more plausible than the one Evergreen presented her. There was no reasonable doubt, no optimistic story she could have woven, and not even an insanity defense she could raise on his behalf. It was attempted murder, without question. With no way out, the tears she had been holding back with sheer will began to fall from her eyes. She didn't want to believe what he was saying, and a part of her still refused to. The other half, however, couldn't deny it. The conflict between her inner voices arguing amongst themselves ushered in a weakness that had nearly brought her to her knees, and all she could do to argue was quietly weep. Evergreen, his story complete, looked on at the pitiful sight. It seems you have no more questions for me, and so we've run out of time. It's very regrettable, truly, that the life of such an upstart trainer as yourself must end without at least having a moment to mourn, but c'est la vie. He then called out to Ash with a booming, commanding voice. Champion! Eliminate her, now! Acknowledged, Ash responded robotically, his actions unperturbed by the girl's silent tears. Charizard, I choose you. Immediately after, there was a loud pop, followed by a blinding flash of light. And when it faded, there stood Ash's infamous flame Pokemon. Familiar in most qualities, strength, bulk, and intimidation, but notably surreal in others. He was hunched over in statue to such an exaggerated extent, and his eyes were dazed and didn't really look at May so much as look past her, as if she were as uninteresting to look at as a tree stump. Now that she thought about it, he didn't so much as make a peep when he was summoned either. There was no roar, flapping of wings, or even a thin plume of smoke from his nostrils, as was his normally preferred method to intimidate. So too did his facial expression not match the demeanor she came to know him for. In many ways, he and Ash looked the same, absent of any sort of fighting spirit, or even, as one may say, much of a spirit at all. Instead, it was replaced by some mindless imperative to fight. Not for sport, but simply to fulfill a command. May, in a sense, wasn't too different then. She too lacked focus in her eyes and drive in her soul. Her head hung low, barely able to see clearly Charizard's clawed feet scraping the dirt and gravel. Nor did she really want to or care much anymore. The logical part of her brain did realize that Evergreen was just trying to demoralize her out of resisting, but the emotional part ignored that reasoning and fell for the mind game all too easily regardless. May! What did it matter anyway? If Ash had really fallen, then was it really worth it? Did anything even matter anymore? Maybe it was best for her to fade into the dark and let Evergreen have his way. Charizard, you slash. Of course it was worth it. Darkness lies within anyone. No one is perfect. No matter what Ash did, he still deserved a second chance, and at the very least, a chance to tell his side of the story. May! He already did tell his side of the story, however. He said it himself. Everything he did to avenge both her and Pikachu. He confessed to his crime. And what else? Scott's house was engulfed in flames through no one's fault but his own. May! Scott still lived, and Ash hadn't killed anyone. Even more, he was ecstatic to see them again. And after everyone had said their part, he saw it fit to ask the mastermind himself his side of the story. He wasn't a mindless killer like Evergreen had suggested he was. He wasn't malicious. Ash deserved another shot like everyone else, and she would not give up on him. May, look out! She snapped her focus ahead of her and instinctively leapt with all of her might to her left to avoid a claw that made its way just mere inches from her neck. Her brain's processing overclocked from the fresh dose of adrenaline, and in a moment that felt eerily like slow motion, she glanced to her right and saw that her escape was enabled not just by her last-second instinct to survive, but also a small yellow blur ramming headfirst into Charizard's side. The relatively tiny mass had little effect on the normally overwhelming inertia of the other, but it was just enough to at least alter his course. Her foot stomped the ground as she nearly lost her balance, not quite sticking the landing and having to teeter for a moment to straighten herself. Charizard, having noticed that he missed, turned to face her and immediately, unenthusiastically, readied another slash or ray. The lack of the element of surprise hampered his attempt, however, as she more readily jumped back to regain space and landed with a tad more finesse before the second swipe would strike her. It wasn't as though she had much of an advantage despite it, really. Charizard was faster, stronger, and bolder than she was, so going solo against him had no favorable endgame. Instinctively, she reached for a Pokeball and called for the first Pokemon that came to her mind as she stared down into the caldera that had threatened to erupt once more.
Oh, you stink!
Thank you, Orville. Ugh. Eevee, take the stage! Another light flickered between her and her adversary, and the flash appeared to distract Charizard for at least a little bit, just long enough for her to skitter away to a safer distance. When her bushy-tailed, canine-like Pokemon appeared in its place, there was still little time to waste, however. Eevee, tackle! Keep him off me! Without delay, her Eevee did what was told and slipped past Charizard's defenses to slam into him, with such a force that staggered him a bit. Not nearly enough to knock him over, but still enough to draw aggro. Satisfied, she barked aloud, "Boy!" to celebrate, but didn't dare take her eyes off her opponent. Charizard, Ash began to command, still emotionally lifeless and utterly immune to Eevee's taunting. Use Seismic Toss on Eevee. Seismic Toss already? Nay exclaimed in her head. That attack Ash would normally not use until well after his opponent was damaged enough that he needed a coup de grace, or at least she never recalls seeing him instruct his Pokemon to use it right out of the gate like that. Perhaps Evergreen, or whoever else it was who was controlling his mind, had little experience with his fighting style to know better. Or, even more worrisome, he knew exactly what he was doing. In a panic, they commanded Eevee to get out of the way, but it was too late. Charizard rushed forward with a powerful flap of his wings and scooped up the small Pokemon in his claws. Gripping her so tightly she couldn't break free, she jetted up towards the ceiling of the glass box, and, at the apex of his flight, tumbled forward endlessly. Faster and faster and faster until both Pokemon looked almost like a blurred ring from below. Eevee, break free! It was impossible. Charizard's grip was too strong, and the constant spinning made Eevee too dizzy to do much. Before long, he began his final nosedive, inching closer and closer to the ground before finally letting go. A loud crash echoed about the field, and as a cloud of dust filled the enclosed space, taking a few sweet moments to settle to reveal the result, like a rug unveiling a new car model in a show. In the center of the field was a small crater where dust, sand, and dirt had been displaced from the impact. In the center of it was May's Eevee, dazed and completely unable to move. She had gone down in a single hit. And where's Zard getting all these moves from? This is like 7 or 8 moves in the last 2 days. Listen, Aiden. Only in the Pokemon games do Pokemon know only like 4 moves at a time. Do you really think in real life they would just immediately forget one of their moves after learning a 5th one? No, I think they would be learning a lot more moves than that. The only reason the 4 moves thing is in the games in the first place is for balance reasons, you know? And also, while we're at it, if we're truly not being true to the games, how come they're not just taking turns attacking each other? Why is it in real time? Am I right? Come on, just, suspend disbelief a little. Just a little bit. Just a little bit. Well, yeah, her EVA ain't gonna have enough HP to take a Seismic Toss from Zard. He's incredibly high level. Yeah, and yeah, like the narrator said, she did it just because it was the first Pokemon to pop in her head, because she had just a little bit of time to think about it. The ZA has real-time battles. True, they are switching to a Xenoblade format, which is awesome, and I love it! Or like something Xenoblade related, and I love it! Oh, I'm so excited! Oh, I'm so excited! Anyway, okay, enough gushing about ZA. Let's get back to the cartoon. Oh man, I thank you for reminding me that exists. Oh, I'm so excited for that. Oh. But yeah, she was kind of sent out as a sacrifice, like, because like, more like it means I'm like, oh crap, I don't have time to think about this. Go, whoever. You know, it is unfortunate for a little thing, but I mean, she did do her best. She tried her best. She did try her best. May was in shock. She knew Charizard was strong already and that he had gone through extra training over the past few days, but she had never anticipated such unprecedented improvement so quickly. The difference wasn't just night and day. It was January and July. She recalled her Pokemon before the damage got any worse, and vowed to get her healed up at the earliest opportunity. She looked upon the nigh insurmountable obstacle ahead and heard a dread-filled lamentation in her honor, or at least an imaginary one composed in the heat of the moment. Desperate, she brought her memory back to that day in the woods when they all found Cindy in the hopes of finding some kind of clue that could help. It was a straightforward chain of events, though it still wasn't that much to go off of. The group found her, she essentially declared war without provocation. Ash mistakenly called for Sceptile despite him no longer being in his party, and substituted Pikachu, and then Cindy resumed battle as if Sceptile was actually there. The latter struck her as especially odd. It was as though she was hallucinating wholesale, something completely contrary to what was reality. And not only that, she didn't even seem to notice that her Skarmory had been defeated. Granted, that was likely simply an amateurish demonstration of control on Annabelle's side, so it wasn't like she could expect Evergreen to make the same mistake. Or could she? She reached for her Pokeballs to place Eevee's back, and then swung her arm forward to send out the Pokemon she traded for. Your turn, Squirtle! Of course, she had left her Squirtle with Max after he had departed for his own Pokemon journey in Hoenn, and so all that flew out of her hand was an empty pocket of air, just as planned. However, all Ash did was stare blankly at where a flash of light would have been, and stand silently for a few seconds before that. Let me repeat this. However, all Ash did was stare blankly at where a flash of light would have been, and stand silently for a few seconds before finally saying, "Charizard, you slash on May." May gasped from out the gape. It's not working?! She figured it had to have been a long shot, but the prospect of being clever was too tempting to pass up. Even so, why didn't it work? I know what you're trying to do, Evergreen stated plainly, smiling as though he himself had captured a queen with a bishop. Did you really think we didn't encounter that issue repeatedly during testing? I personally made sure that was the first thing that was fixed. She couldn't depend on taking advantage of exploits. If I want to get out in one piece, I'll need to snap him out of it somehow. The solution was simple enough, but even so, she had no idea how to even carry it out. Heck, she had no idea what was even causing it in the first place. Figuring that out was priority number one. But how could she do it? She saw Charizard twitch, the first sign of him about to lunge. Time of the essence, she couldn't come to rely on her own Pokemon for the time being, so she had to go with the next best thing. Pikachu, take the stage! Pikachu nodded in acknowledgement, and zipped up to stand between him and May in protection, raring to go and ready to pounce himself. Use Thunderbolt! His cheeks then built up stored charge, and with a loud cry, let it all out with a bright flash of lightning at the winged lizard. It hit its mark, and Charizard was engulfed in an electrostatic light. He roared in pain, and almost dropped to his knees when the sustained bolt of lightning had ceased a couple seconds later, after which he charged towards Pikachu at Ash's command with another slash attack. He's impossible to stop! While Pikachu was able to dodge to the side using agility, May could tell Charizard had practiced closing gaps swiftly. He was very clearly deadly in close quarters combat, and so May commanded Pikachu to stay at a respectable distance while she continued to mull over how to stop the battle quickly. It was especially weird, this situation, because when Cindy was hypnotized in the forest, she was the only one affected. Her Skarmory was completely unaffected, which made sense, as it could be possible that Annabelle could psychically control a Pokemon while they were already recalled in a Pokeball, not to mention the alleged difficulty of controlling just one person, and at a distance at that. Ash and Charizard, however, were definitely both hypnotized, showing the exact same symptoms. Charizard was fierce, to be sure, but he wasn't as savage in combat as she'd previously seen him, so it was the only explanation. That still didn't explain the method, however. How was Evergreen able to pull this off? Was he himself psychic? If he was, why would he need a champion or a team of underlings to do his bidding? Not only that, how would he be able to hypnotize two victims at once? No, it was impossible. Annabelle's voice filled her ears as she recalled the story she told everyone at the Pokemon Center after their encounter. Okay, there is Okay. Sorry, I had to reposition my place here a little bit. And also check chat. And there is nothing else in chat. So, guess we can continue. Annabelle read Cindy's mind and saw what she was dreaming about in her unconscious state. She was wandering a vast, bright forest, searching for something. With a deep breath, Annabelle focused her mind. She tapped into the girl's thoughts, and soon the body began to sit up, eyes still shut. Her eyelids slowly opened, but the orbs within remained dim, focused on some faraway, unseen object. Awesome! Greta explained, unable to stop herself from jumping in celebration. You really did it! The startling jump caused Annabelle to lose her concentration. The younger girl fell backwards again, resuming her undisturbed slumber. Annabelle, on the other hand, fell back into a sitting position, panting deeply with sweat pouring down her head. What happened? The blonde asked, stepping over. Why did she fall back down? It required the utmost concentration, Annabelle said, still panting. When you spoke, I couldn't focus. She shook her head. And unless you couldn't tell, it's already really taxing as it is. Greta scowled. Well then, pick up the kid and let's go, she gruffly said, turning around to leave. Annabelle did as she was told, and with Cindy resting precariously on her back in an awkward piggyback ride, followed suit. If Evergreen were the one controlling them directly, he wouldn't have been able to converse with her without him losing his concentration, she noted. Come to think of it, if he were psychic, he wouldn't have needed to subject Annabelle to those evaluations anyway. So it had to have been something else who was controlling them. But what? Was it some sort of machine giving off weird mind control signals somewhere in the facility? No, that was impossible too, or else she and Pikachu would have been hypnotized along with the others. It had to be something, though. Something that could not have its concentration broken so easily, nor could it be so non-discriminatory as to put everyone within a 1 kilometer distance under control. As Charizard swooped by in an attempt to snap at a Pikachu still too quick to catch, May caught a small glimpse of what it could have been. After he missed his target and ascended, exposing the back of his horns, she saw what looked to be a black hair clip clamped to the nape of his neck and running a few inches down his spine. She didn't get a much better look at it in the split second she had, but she knew for a fact that it wasn't there when she and Ash had gone flying the other day. And so she had another idea, a risky one. Pikachu, wait for it to grab you with a seismic toss! Pikachu gaped at her, completely dumbfounded. And then after a second, his expression twisted into a look of incredulity when he realized he didn't, in fact, mishear her. I know it sounds crazy, she reassured him, but trust me on this. Let him get in range and wait for my command. Pikachu still didn't seem very convinced, but he nevertheless gave a muted Pika in understanding. Although it was less out of confidence and more like he wanted to say, all right, but this is insane. Ash, or perhaps controller rather, seemed to agree. Charizard, use seismic toss. Perfect. Charizard silently complied with his request and swooped back down towards Pikachu, still emotionally constrained, but nevertheless building up as much speed as one who had gone berserk. Pikachu twitched, but somehow resisted all his urge to dodge. Besides a few glances from side to side, he stood firm until he got closer. And closer. And closer. And then finally, Pikachu, jump over him and use Iron Tail on his neck! He didn't even think twice. His jump came by pure survival instinct, as Charizard's nose was practically touching his. Unfortunately, though, the flame Pokemon was faster that time, managing to snatch Pikachu right out of the air like a frog from a pond. May's heart sank to the pit of her stomach as she imagined all manner of gruesome outcomes that were about to unfold, but she pressed on anyway. She had to. Break free of his grip, or it's all over! Thundershock his claws! Pikachu obeyed, and a small spark of light flashed from above. By the looks of it, it was enough to loosen Charizard's grip, and he wasted no time to break free. From there, a rather unusual marvel showed itself to the spectators below. A small figure struggled against the weaving and buckling of the Colossus, barely able to keep his grip, shaking about like a rag doll. There were a few times that May feared that a fall was inevitable, but somehow he managed to hang on and inch his way closer to his neck, until finally he saw the strange black device surgically inserted into his spine. After a few seconds, he was in range. The Charizard had only grown more violent in the hopes of forcing him off. When he figured out how to properly grip him, however, it was all too late. Now go for it, Pikachu! Iron Tail! To be honest, she wasn't even sure how it would work in that sort of scenario. Charizard was weaving, changing course, accelerating and decelerating. It was just overall a volatile and unpredictable animal. Pikachu needed time to charge energy into his tail, and then get a running start to finally strike his target. It was a very peculiar set of steps that, to that day, didn't yield consistent results. A voice in her head asked her, how could she expect him to perform such a specific move when he barely had any control over his movement to begin with? And then there was the matter of what the aftermath would be. Would it even work? Or, if it did, would Charizard even be okay? Would destroying a device with it still functioning cause any bad side effects? Would the Iron Tail miss, or be so strong that it would cause nerve damage? What if it permanently paralyzed him? Or worse? They shut up the voice, insisting that she had faith Pikachu would do it, and that everything would work out. Self-doubt in her abilities to instruct Pokemon remained, but she knew he could handle it, and that he would prevail. The only other choice she had was to surrender, and belief itself was all that was left of what she could put faith in. Pikachu, having taken a moment to charge his tail, waited for the right moment to jump and slam it into his target, which is not as easy as it looked, considering the constant shifting forces shaking him about like a maraca. Before long, though, he got his chance, when Charizard took just a couple seconds to rest before attempting to shake him off again. He flew straight, and just a few feet below the top of the glass box. Might have been a tight squeeze for most, but for Pikachu's purposes, it was enough space to get the job done. He maintained the charge, jumped into the air, quickly twisted to maximize his torque, and then... Charizard's eyes grew dim from the impact, and he silently began to fall back to Earth, the back of his neck sparking with small discharges. Bits of plastic and metal showered down from the sky like little meteoroids that left behind thin, wispy contrails that smelled of sulfur and burnt rubber. He landed with a loud crash, and Pikachu soon followed, fortunately managing to land, however ungracefully, on the former's prone body like a trampoline. How did the Thunderbolt not destroy short-circuit that thing, though? It's this thing called Ohm's Law, believe it or not. Do you know how when lightning strikes cars, people inside are okay? Like, lightning doesn't affect things that are inside something metal. It's the same exact principle. It's because the device used something called a Faraday cage to basically keep the charge inside, or to keep like the active charge inside to 0. Yeah, so that phenomenon is described by Ohm's law in physics. And that's how Faraday cages work, and it's actually how people can protect their electronics from electromagnetic pulses too. Plus, there was some insulation on the outside too that helped a lot too. Hence the burnt rubber. Yeah. I mean, for something that was supposed to be battle ready, they wouldn't have just made it unprotected completely from like something that would have been feasible to be hit with, especially Charizard, who, you know, is part flying type and is therefore weak to electricity. So yeah, they had to make it resilient for fighting purposes because that's where it would primarily be used. Duh, no, it's not a duh thing. No. This is something that not everyone knows about, and it's something cool that I don't know. It's just something cool that I wanted to, talk about because I don't get to talk about that stuff very often. Stuff that I learned in college, you know. It's like, hey, I get to share my knowledge with people. You know, I just like it. I like it. Okay, now before I continue though, I have to find what this is. Yeah, so the notes are kind of out of the way, so I have to make sure that I'm on the right tab and pulling the right ones. Interesting stuff, for real, for real. You took physics in high school, but that was a while ago, so now you don't fully remember everything. Yeah, they may not even covered it in, like, high school physics. This was, like, college physics, and physics for engineers, more specifically. Physics 2, even, because that's when we primarily went over, like, electronics and energy and stuff like that. The first one was more kinematically focused, but second one, definitely more about, you know, electricity and energy. The lectures were good, but the homework was horrible, by the way. It was always much harder than anything that was ever talked about in class, so you were basically encouraged to collaborate. In other words, share answers with others. It was not a good system. It was just not good. I hated that class. How do you make physics a bad class? Seriously, physics is one of my favorite subjects. Okay, you know what? Okay, you know what? I'm stalling again. I'm digressing. I need to get back to the cartoon. May waited with bated breath while the dust cleared, clutching her heart in panicked concern as she spied for even the slightest hint of movement from the two Pokemon. Pikachu, a tad dazed from the landing, climbed up from Charizard's back and signaled her a peace sign. So he was okay at least. Charizard himself, on the other hand, still didn't move. Not good, she told herself. She sprinted up to Ash's fire-type Pokemon and inspected his body for any obvious injuries. His scales were tough and singed a bit from the electric-type attacks, but otherwise any wounds he suffered were superficial. Even his spine seemed okay, despite the strong iron tail that completely destroyed that device, whatever it was, some parts of which still attached, but at that point, hardly more functional than body piercings. And yet, he himself would not wake. She tried to shake him awake, and shook harder when her meager strength couldn't move him. And when he remained still, her breath froze in her lungs. "Charizard, wake up!" she wanted to say, but her throat choked on her fear. Pikachu joined in, attempting to add his strength to her own, but he still did not budge. May's terror grew tenfold. She hugged her chest and began to shake profusely, dire and morbid thoughts running through her head. "I killed him," she repeated herself over and over. "He's dead." Ages passed, it felt like, with her just sitting there, until she heard a startlingly loud noise erupt in front of her. He was asleep? Did that mean he was okay and that he wasn't hypnotized anymore after all? The fact that he was no longer trying to kill her was a rather encouraging sign, to be sure. But she couldn't be positive until she had another data point to test with. She stood to face Ash once more. He stared back at her absent-mindedly, as though he had just gotten up from a long nap himself, or was resurrected from the dead and hungered for her brains. There were no other signs of emotion, nor any noticeable reaction from having one of his strongest Pokemon felled so quickly. Instead, he slowly raised his Pokeball and uttered, "Charizard, return," and waited until his Pokemon was completely engulfed in a red light and safely encapsulated. Then, she had another idea. Letting the wild girl inside her take control, she sprinted toward him without thinking, and tackled Ash to the ground before he had the chance to send out his next Pokemon. She embraced his arms and pinned his feet to keep him from escaping, in an endeavor made more challenging by her inferior strength. Fortunately, her leverage and flexibility were significantly superior to his, especially with his motions akin to that of a marionette with no fine motor control. "What are you doing?" Evergreen shouted from atop the stage. "Stop what you're doing at once!" That only made her want to struggle more. In defiance, she put more of her upper body strength to work, including even her head to keep his from flailing about. Through their fight, she caught a nauseating whiff of his odor, pungent from an obvious lack of bathing and a slight burning from some unknown source, except maybe his training with Charizard. She held her breath to keep herself from gagging and conceding room for him to fight back. And after a few seconds, she managed to keep him pinned onto his stomach. She tugged the back of his shirt, and then she saw it. A strange black device implanted into the back of his neck. A braid of wires ran down about a 3-inch space along his spine, held together by a brace with the likeness of a hair clip or a stereotypical integrated circuit. The wires had the appearance of a dark grapevine growing out of 12, maybe 16 entries into his flesh, and each had a small green LED faintly twinkling like a tiny wireless Ethernet adapter. No! May ignored Evergreen's futile attempt to stop her and reached for the wires, yanking as hard as she could. There was significant resistance, and she was afraid that she was going to rip his skin off. Her fears were assuaged, however, when they eventually snapped out, and with them the black brace. And, almost like a switch had been flipped off, Ash's body went completely limp and no longer tried to struggle against her weight. Satisfied at her work dispatching her attackers, she stood up and brushed all the dust off her legs. Afterward, she turned to face Evergreen, who looked... well, hell on earth was probably how one would have most aptly described the sort of outrage that most wouldn't consider to be psychologically possible. His face was a deep crimson, and twisted with such an ire for her that she expected his head to literally explode at any moment. He shook violently in a last-ditch attempt to control his temper, tapping his feet when the urge to strangle her had almost taken hold. But surprisingly, he didn't speak. "So, what now, Evergreen?" May taunted, holding up the device as though it were at the head of a slain enemy. "Not much of a threat without slaves to hide behind, are ya?" He was as quiet as the grave. He uttered nothing in response. Got your tongue? Well, if you have no more opponents to send my way, then... She was interrupted from a groan coming from the ground. May turned to see the source, and she saw Ash barely managing to pull himself up with wobbly arms. Concern for the boy washed over her and overrode any desire to continue antagonizing the man watching them both, with a gaze filled to the brim with spite. "Ash, you're awake?" she exclaimed as she rushed over to him. Pikachu, also excited, dashed over along with her and tugged on his shirt, as if to do whatever he could to help him up. "May?" he grumbled, clearly groggy. "Where am I?" "No time to explain. Are you okay? Can you walk?" "Yeah, I think so." He tried to push himself up and stand, but he had overestimated himself. His legs were quite weak to stand on his own, and his balance was abysmal, made worse as soon as his mind registered the agonizing sharp pain in the back of his neck. He clutched it and fell backwards into May's arms, writhing. And, almost as soon as he had a chance to massage his neck, his head cracked open with a debilitating migraine of its own. "Ah! It hurts! Everything hurts! What happened to me?" "Ash, shh, calm down. You'll be alright," she cooed soothingly. "You were under a hypnotic spell, kinda, but Pikachu and I got you out of it." Her words did little to numb the pain, but the sound of her voice still had a sort of tranquilizing effect on him. He stopped squirming and resisting May's attempts to get him to calm himself, eventually taking deep breaths when she instructed him to. Soon enough of the pain subsided to the point where he could continue the conversation without having to recoil and wince, if for a moment. "I was hypnotized? Like with Cindy in the forest the other day?" May nodded. "But it wasn't Annabelle this time. It was this." She held up the device still clutched in her hand and handed it to him. He looked at it with a sort of confused wonder, turning it and spinning it all the ways he could to observe every angle and individual piece. He became fixated on the wires, brace, and particularly the nearly couple dozen thin needles that glistened in the light. He touched the back of his neck for a moment to feel the puncture wounds, and then tossed the device away in disgust when he realized that the needles were inside him not a moment ago. "Ash, do you remember what do you remember last?" He stared off into space for a bit as he rewound his memories and played them back in sequence. I saw you again, and then I flew back to the battle fortress, and then I went to talk to Evergreen, and then... He paused, his mind having gone blank, followed up quickly with another powerful migraine. Clutched his head and roared in agony, nearly breaking May's heart. "Yes, and then?" "I don't remember." He trailed off for a moment before glaring holes into the stones resting next to him. "But I do know who caused this!" To May's surprise, he got up with all of his might, and though he swayed a bit as he struggled to recalibrate his balance, he was up and about, able to completely ignore the pain he was in. "Evergreen!" he shouted, startling the girl. "I know it's you! What did you do to me?" The man looked over at him for a moment, before turning to the side and averting his gaze, still saying nothing. Answer me! No longer able to keep his rage under control, Evergreen then loosened his vocal cords and let loose with all the venting his body needed. You will not speak to me in that way, you little whelp! He bellowed, taking Ash aback. I did not intend to have all my work undone by a couple of dumb, daft, dimwit adults! And you have the gall to demand I tell you what I've done? How dare you! Ash said nothing. The heated outburst coming from the man who, not long ago, was helping him ostensibly under the goodness of his heart, surprised him and, to put it simply, scared him. The sort of fear he reserved only for the quiet ones who finally cracked under a titanic weight. Unable to voice any sort of response, all he could do was motion for him to continue after his rant had stalled by an awkward pause. Yes, I put you under a hypnotic trance. What with your beloved girlfriend's miraculous resurrection and all, there was little more leverage I could exert over you without taking less moderate measures. And so I just used that ability that girl Annabelle was kind enough to teach us so I can get my champion back to tie up the rest of the loose ends. Annabelle helped you with this? Indeed she did. And that is all I will say to you. You should know I abhor repeating myself. And between you and the girl there, I think you all know plenty enough. May tapped Ash's shoulder. Don't worry, she whispered. I'll fill you in when we get out of here. Okay, this last one doesn't have a note. Oh wait, no it does. It's just at the bottom of the page. Okay. Okay, we're good. May tapped Ash's shoulder. Don't worry, she whispered. I'll fill you in when we get out of here. Evergreen let out a frustrated, raspy chuckle. And don't even think this means that you're getting out of here. The doors are all locked, and you have no way out. Ash stepped forward between him and May and Pikachu, ignoring the headaches that half-blinded him. We're not powerless, you know. I may be in pain, but I'm not under your control anymore. We still have our Pokemon, and what do you have? You have none of your own! Evergreen flashed a grin, still clearly seething with rage. First of all, you only have that yellow rat to help you. Well, that and your girlfriend's Pokemon, or what's left of them. Your Charizard is out cold, and I saw to it your other Pokemon have devices of their own. And believe me, they will not hesitate to use lethal force against you if it came to that, so don't even try to send them out. Then, he laughed. Second of all, I'm not completely defenseless. I do have one more Pokemon that can defend me. Wait, he does? Ash thought to himself. He never told me during training he had a Pokemon with him. Then the question became, what? What kind of Pokemon did he get a hold of that would be able to keep them away? Whatever it was, he was confident that between Pikachu and May's remaining Pokemon, they'd be able to overcome whatever he could throw their way, no problem. But even so, the thought scared him deep down. His fears were realized when a loud finger snapped, stabbed his ears, and further inflamed his headache. A whoosh filled the room outside the glass box, and a strong gust of wind bellowed in a twisting vortex and knocked over most of the monitors that were already precariously hanging over the edges of their desks. The swirling air spun faster and faster until it became a towering spire of fire, engulfing the box completely and quickly turning the battlefield into a greenhouse, and blinding the couple in a dazzling display of rainbow flames. They shielded their eyes before their retinas could burn, and almost toppled over when a powerful rumble filled the stadium, followed by a loud crash, and the sound of shattered glass pelting the ground like a scalding hail. When the sound of the crystalline rain had petered out, May took a moment to feel the air, and, oddly enough, it was no longer so hot that she thought her skin was going to melt off. It was cool and breezy, not unlike the tropical zephyr the cover had enjoyed not long ago. When she looked up, however, a tropical paradise she did not see. Instead, she saw a great bird. Its wings dyed a brilliant shade of gold and orange. Its aura, significantly hotter than the surrounding cooler air, shined upon them like the morning sun, its silver comb and tail feathers radiating a heavenly light. Its down scintillated, tiny stars popping in and out of existence against the matte lighting of the dull black ceiling. The wings' flaps generated many tornadic infernos that swirled in all directions before eventually twisting themselves into nothingness. Its talons continuously gripped at the air, like it was strangling prey or it seemed prey to strangle. Its beak opened, revealing a deafening shriek that vibrated their ribs like tuning forks and forced them to clamp their ears shut. This was no mere Pokemon that Evergreen had hidden up his sleeve. It was one the legends themselves had spoken of, and it had eyed the three of them hungrily. So, well, yep, he's got a Ho-Oh. Not just that, he's got a shiny Ho-Oh. Dun dun dun! Oh boy! Well, it's a great fanfic, Mochi. Can't wait to hear the next one. Yep, yep. But listen, though. Listen. You have to at least see how it ends, right? You have to at least see how horrible and gruesome their deaths are gonna be, right? Like, come on. It's like, I put a lot of thought and time and blood, sweat, and tears into, like, meticulously, like, detailing every macabre detail of their demise. Okay, you know, just kidding. We're going to chapter 40. Chapter 40. Together, we're unbeatable. Every cell of skin melting. You mean? I mean, yeah. I mean, every cell has a story, you know? The final chapter, I'm sure. They need amazing plot armor to beat a Ho-Oh. Well, think about it. Well, wait for it. May stood in awe at the frightening sight. It admired its strange beauty in the same way a fish would look upon an osprey. Her pointer finger limply outstretched, but her mouth agape, and silent from shock. She stared at the bird, both to carefully read its movement in case it suddenly attacked, as well as to simply take in a view most in their lifetimes would never. The bird, in turn, stared back, as if to enjoy the same luxury. Ash, ever the scholar that he was, instinctively reached for his Pokedex, but recoiled when his migraine zapped his head. Between the headache and the waves of heat distorting the light around the Pokemon like a liquid magnifying glass, you couldn't see ahead very clearly. Feeling vulnerable, he blindly grasped May's hand to get his bearings, but grabbed nothing but thin air. After a while, May's throat could finally make a sound resembling human speech and string some meaning together. That's it! The Ho-Oh from my dream! That's it! The one that had different colors? Ash asked through clamped eyes and clenched teeth. That Ho-Oh? The bird's shape and scheme were unmistakably different than what Pokédex showed her, and her dream was so vivid and traumatic she'd never conceived confusing the two. She nodded and turned to face the shadowy man looking down upon them from behind his demigod-like bodyguard, gripping Ash's hand tightly so he didn't have to fumble any longer. How'd you even manage to find this, Evergreen? She asked them as their de facto representative, while Ash still reeled from having that device ripped off him. Did you steal this one too? I'm no more a thief than a trainer who would swipe a Spearow from its nest, if that's what you're calling me, he snapped back. The only thing that differed was the method. All I needed was a lead where to find it. And did I not say that Brandon's research would pay off in dividends? So this is why you roped Brandon into this? So you could capture Ho-Oh? Evergreen sighed regretfully. No way to let the cat out of back into the bag, I suppose. But in short, yes. Why would he even agree to go along with what you wanted? Ash growled, his voice raspy. Was this the dream he cared so much about? He was never that forthcoming about that, even to me. But it couldn't be more obvious. He pursued his research with the sole purpose of finding and studying Ho-Oh. And not only did he ultimately succeed, but also with his help, we discovered a truly marvelous specimen. And now we get to put it to the test. Ash struggled against his weight to pull himself upright. Not if I have anything to say about it! He stepped forward, finally getting the hang of his balance. But the vibration of his voice ringing his jaw triggered another severe migraine. He instinctively put his hand to his temple, yet try as he might to sustain eye contact with his adversary, the pain overpowered him and forced his eyes closed. May then pushed herself past and held him back with a protective, outstretched arm. Shaking your head. No, Ash, you need to rest. Let me take it from here. Ash was taken aback, his mouth ajar, stunned. The feeling of electricity still shocking his cranium, incidentally. He didn't much like the thought of him being useless to assist, and he would have shaken his own head back at her in protest, were not for the fact that shaking his brain about like a soggy cabbage in a jar would have only made the pain worse. Are you sure? Yet, instead asked, half conceding. By yourself? Of course! Just sit tight. It's my turn to protect you this time. Go and rest. Taking her eyes off him while he found a safe spot to take a breather, she turned to face Evergreen and the Ho under his command. Come on, Pikachu! Pikachu dashed to her side and released a few warning sparks from his cheeks, snarling, Pika! In an adrenaline-filled war cry. Ho snapped back at him with a rally cry of its own, so loud it almost shattered what remained of the glass box, and blew a sizable volume of dust into their eyes. But try as the ensuing shockwave might to knock them over, they planted their feet and refused to back down. All right, Evergreen, it ends now! The swagger induced little more reaction out of him than a chuckle. Well, aren't you a confident one? Let's see how long you survive. Evergreen thrust his hand forward, clenched his fist, his rage having come to a simmer. His composure congealed. Now, Ho-Oh! Incinerate them with sacred fire! A loud whistle buzzed in the air in front of them as a white-hot fireball, with the intensity to match a distant nova, materialized in front of the Pokemon's beak. A shockwave of air, like that from a jet engine, burst through just a moment later, a mystical ball of flame careening towards the relatively unimposing pair standing up from down below like a deer in a pair of headlights. Oh yeah, I wrote this one! Yes, I did, Dana! Haha! Also, hi, Dana. May had but only a couple seconds to react, let alone issue a command. So much of what happened next was largely the result of instinct. The two ran in separate directions before the destructive comet struck the ground and braced for the imminent impact. There was a loud explosion and a hot flash of light in front of them, and she had half expected being riddled with stone and glass shrapnel. To her relief, however, all she got was a cloud of dust in her eyes and hair. She looked around as the fallout settled to the ground and realized that the shockwave had launched her a good couple meters backwards. Pikachu didn't fare much better, having sprawled onto his back in a daze. Pikachu! She called between coughs and gasps for air. Are you okay? Pikachu scrambled to get up and ran in the opposite direction to create some space between him and the large bird before it launched another bomb-like volley. He didn't validate her concerned call with a response, but the fact that he had started moving like nothing had happened was enough to an answer for her. The good news forced a smile on her face. Alright, I'll take that as a yes. In that case, use Thunderbolt! Pikachu built up a massive charge before letting loose a major surge of electrical energy. It flew towards Ho-Oh fast and clean, and May cheered internally when the hit was all but assured. However, not even a second later, it inexplicably turned to the side, curved to the side before harmlessly hitting the ground just a few feet from where May had gotten back up, as though a gale that somehow had the ability to redirect lightning had whipped up and blew at them. The clap of thunder that boomed her ears gave her more of a jolt than the thunderbolt would have, although those large sparks spooked her nonetheless. How did that even happen? Pikachu's aim was spot on, especially with such a straightforward shot to its target. It could have just been a rookie mistake, so what happened? She would have sooner not wanted the question answered than having to be shamed, now that Evergreen paid any due sympathy to her concerns. Do you like it? He said with a sneer. I was as surprised as you when I found that... I was you to find that it accesses extrasensory. Due in no small part to the fact that it practically destroyed the first device we tested on it, and even almost bricked our computer equipment. But 'tis how the path of science sometimes winds. May had little recourse than to feel spooked from the sudden development. It was clear from the reflected attack that they couldn't play it safe and out-camp Ho-Oh. which, unfortunately for her, meant they would have to get close. She froze in place, so hesitant to take her opponent head-on that she began to shiver despite the overwhelming heat wave that had engulfed them. It was a fear so strong that Evergreen could smell it from across the field. "You can't stand there forever, you know," he said, thoroughly enjoying the scent. "Eventually you'll have to strike back. Second fire again, Ho-Oh! Pikachu, dodge left!" Her words might as well have bounced off thick walls, but with a massive amount of noise building up from the Ho-Oh's attack. That Pikachu knew well enough not to make an attempt to tank it. Another large shockwave erupted from the fireball's point of impact, but fortunately, both trainer and Pokemon were far enough away to not suffocate from the cloud of dust or be incinerated by the wall of heat. "Give it another Thunderbolt!" Pikachu was unsure whether or not trying something that nearly backfired a moment ago. Sorry, I lost my place. Pikachu was unsure whether or not trying something that nearly backfired a moment ago was wise, and he had half a mind to disobey May's order completely. Perhaps instead to charge in with an Iron Tail or a Volt Tackle. However, he took it as a sign she simply wanted him to keep his distance. Not that it would do much if they were being sniped with what was essentially a tiny star, but even so, maybe the first time was just a fluke. More quickly this time, he unleashed residual charge at his opponent so it could catch it unawares, slowly building up strength when he thought it hit its mark. But again, it never did. Not only did the bolt get reflected with another extrasensory, it hit much closer, with embers from the Thunderstrike barely grazing May's face, and the electric potential forcing tiny strands of hair not held in place by her bandana to stand on end. "Repeating the same move twice in a row? Far too predictable," Evergreen taunted. "Trap them with Fire Spin!" Another wave of heat burst from Ho-Oh's mouth, then taking the form of an intimidating fire whirl. Its form, completely at the mercy of the updrafts and wind caused from the bird's hot aura, twisted and turned as it approached Pikachu and completely surrounded him. Panicked like the scared mouse he was, he could only stand in place and carefully eye the perimeter for any sort of opening he could slip through. But there wasn't one. He was completely sealed off from the rest of the battlefield, the walls of flame too high to jump over and too hot to jump through without taking serious damage. The stage had been, effectively, cut down to 1/10 of its size. "This is bad," May thought to herself, almost spitting through clenched teeth. "Pikachu's a sitting duck in there!" And as seconds went on, the flames constricted and limited Pikachu's already scant space further. The panicked look in his eyes only deepened, and he had little recourse but to either futilely run around in circles or to stand in place and consign himself to inevitable third-degree burns. May had begun to panic too. She even considered consulting Ash, assuming she had the time. But the flames were closing in quick, and the fact that he was strangely silent throughout the whole battle thus far appeared to suggest that he had probably fallen unconscious against the wall. And, of course, there was an even more obvious matter to recollect. She was supposed to be protecting him! What kind of guardian could she be if she had to constantly lean on her dependent as if he were a crutch? No, she had to depend on her own strength. She had to. It being a matter of reality or simply a matter of pride mattering not. And so May's brain ran as fast as hard as it could to find something. Anything that could be some kind of solution. But even so, as her synapses screamed along, only one coherent thought managed to pass through her mind like a broken record. What would Ash do? Surely the answer lay there. He had gotten himself out of sticky situations more times than she could count, and that wasn't even including all the battles that she had seen herself. Each time involved thinking outside the box in some way, using some sort of unorthodox choice of move on some odd target and somehow turning it into an advantage. She had to forget all her biases. She had to forget all preconceived notions of what was in front of her. She had to forget. As May cleared her mind, so too did the mental blocks holding her back slip away. Her fear had left her, and in its place was a calming zen, her focus acute. Images flashed through her eyes as she considered any sort of off-the-wall idea that she could conjure and predicted the outcome. One in particular stood out. Flames dying out from a torrent of water. Without an easy access to water-type attacks, or even time, it would have been rather difficult filling that vision. Looking at the ground, however, perhaps she found the next best thing. "Pikachu!" She screamed at the top of her lungs. "Slash at the ground with Iron Tail!" He had little time to question her order, much less consider the outcome. But with his obedient instincts kicking in, he did as he was told. He focused energy into his tail until it flashed a greenish white, ran towards the room with a wall of flame, and unleashed a surge of strength toward the ground. A large cloud of dust and soil lifted into the air and impaired his vision before billowing back down. The heat of the flames, coupled with the dust particles, was choking, and he wanted to back away just as soon as he went in for even the slightest chance to feel cooler air. But oddly enough, after a couple seconds, some of the heat on his face began to dissipate. The flames that were flirting with his comfort zone had backed away. 2, some even, had disappeared completely. And so Pikachu realized May's idea. The dirt and dust suffocated the flames and formed a fire break. He dashed through the opening in the fire, taking care to not get any residual dust in his eyes and lungs. As soon as he felt his fur fill with the soothing sensation of colder air, he took a gasp of oxygen and let the excess nerves flush through his system. He had escaped, with nary a scorch mark. Huh. Okay, because that's a mon with... Because that's a mon with 154 special defense. Of course, Pikachu isn't really going to touch it. Of course, top of extrasensory being a psychic-type move. AKA OP. Fun fact, I use extrasensory as a reference to my shiny Ho-Oh that I caught in Pokemon Go, which also knows extrasensory as a fast move. At least I think it's a fast move. I'm pretty sure it's not a charge attack. Maybe it is. I don't remember. You just realized the title. Soul Bays and Grouded theme song as well. Oh yeah! I love Ace Attorney. That's always this in Ace Attorney. This plays when they're doing this thing called revisualization, like trying to think outside the box, which is exactly what May's doing. So, oh man, it fits it so well. Also, just a phenomenal coverage move for Ho-Oh. Yeah, true. I mean, I'm just taking your word for it because I don't actually use Ho-Oh competitive. I don't even play Pokemon competitively. I play Smash and Splatoon competitively. The only thing Pokemon related that annoys me in Smash is Pikachu, and that's not even because it's not even because Thunder does all that damage. It's the fact that he is such a small hitbox and pancakes through everything that I throw at him, and it's annoying. But anyway. Oh, you meant unbeatable, like the season of the Pokemon anime. Yeah. Oh, I see. Yeah, it is kind of a reference to that as well, because that song is also absolutely goated. I absolutely adore that theme song, that opening. It's also a slight reference to Xenoblade. Because one of the lines that Shulk says in battle sometimes, or like one of the exchanges that goes on is like Charlotte saying, it's like we're fighting as one! And then Shulk can respond to that with saying, as one, we're unbeatable. So, you know, I had Xenoblade on the brain. You don't know about competitive Pokemon? Oh, I guess I thought you did. I figured that you of all people would be a competitive Pokemon player. I don't know, maybe you should play it. Okay, you know, fair enough. All the Ho and opening trap slap, TBH. Yeah, honestly, it's such a good song. Like that guitar, like I can hear that guitar riff, man. You know? God, it's such a good song. Okay, anyway, I saw enough again. Back to the cartoon. May jumped excitedly in celebration, which Pikachu mirrored, scarcely believing her quick thinking had worked so well. Perhaps Ash had been rubbing off on her, however much she considered it a shame that he wasn't awake to see it. Even so, it wasn't to last, as a moment later, her self-discipline, or was it maybe her survival instinct, stayed her body from focusing too little on the enemy in front of them. And so the battle had returned to a neutral state. Both sides took turns staring at each other, twitching their eyes, waiting for their opponent to overcommit and make a mistake. May learned from hers, and so she elected to not make any sudden movements or to poke. This gave her some time to observe and consider her options, but she was none too happy with her lack of ideas. If I try another Thunderbolt, he's just going to reflect it back at us, she thought. Getting too close is also risky, but there's no way around it. If we want to win, we'll need to defeat that Ho-Oh, or to turn it against Evergreen. To do that, we'll need to find that device and destroy it, just like the others. The problem, though, was actually getting close enough to even think of destroying it. There's no telling what would happen. Getting fried with another Sacred Fire, but at point-blank range, getting thrown about like a ragdoll with extrasensory. For all she knew, there was some other attack that he had not yet revealed. What if it could kill them all with a single hit? With Pikachu being the only target on the field, there's no way we'll get close enough without having to dodge Hellfire left and right. Then it hit her. Only target? That's it! All that time, she was operating under the assumption that the Battle Fortress, as cruel as it was, still operated under their series of rules like any other facility. For a good portion of the ascent, that was the case, despite the obvious loopholes. but now she had to face what was essentially a brainwashed demigod, and this was after having to fight a brainwashed Ash and Charizard too. It was fair to say that there was no longer any point in playing fair. Evergreen didn't deserve it. She reached for one of her own Pokeballs and threw it out into the field. Blaziken, take the stage! A bright orange humanoid shape materialized next to Pikachu, the white light from the ball melding with the hot flames and concocting a bright golden glow at their feet. Her evolved starter Pokemon had already entered her default battle stance, as though prepared to take up the call. She and Pikachu looked at each other for a moment and nodded in allegiance before turning to face their mutual foe. The solace in the fact he had a backup forced a sigh of relief from Pikachu's lungs and a surge of electricity from his cheeks, renewed vigor incarnate. Evergreen, realizing the breach in the implicit contract, shook his head in disapproval. Resorting to a 2 versus 1, huh? Can't say I didn't expect this, but I must say it's still disappointing. Are you so incapable to face me mano-a-mano that you so quickly fall back to a man advantage? So safe, the man cowering behind his bodyguard was what May wanted to spit back, had the scorching air not left her mouth dry. Left unsaid even, lack of desire to give him the time of day. Unable to read the room, or perhaps merely unwilling, he pressed on. I mean, by all means, if we're going to go this far, why stop here? Why not some of the rest of your Pokemon if you're so determined to brute force your way out? She was tempted to, but she knew it was a bad idea. It wasn't that she couldn't send out Skitty or even Beautifly as well, and maybe for a moment it would have given her more of the strength she needed to breach through the wall of attacks, were it not for her refusal to think of her Pokemon as mere reserves. Moreover, it was hard enough for her to control 2 Pokemon at once. Twice that would be far beyond her ability to command in any organized manner. Hoa would have certainly taken advantage of the sheer logistics required for her to order around 4 Pokemon simultaneously, and possibly even take them down in one fell swoop. She suspected that Evergreen was well aware of this fact too, of course, and she wasn't going to fall for it. Finally, he sighed when it was clear that she wouldn't take the bait. All right then, far be it from me to dictate your funeral when I'm just a simple griever. Without giving her much time to respond, he commanded Ho-Oh to, once again, unleash another sacred fire at their position. As the attack wound up, they ordered both Pikachu and Blaziken to rush toward it, but split up so as to not get picked off. With a puff of breath, they did what they were told, and dashed ahead, but took care in the meanwhile to maintain significant distance between each other. The shot of flame eventually built up to its full strength, and got launched forward. Ho-Oh, or rather, the one controlling it, couldn't be sure which was to be the main target if it couldn't get both. So instead of aiming for one opponent in particular, it instead thought it better to aim it directly in the space between them, and let the ensuing explosion take care of the rest. The fireball, lobbed from its beak at a mortar-like speed, hit the ground at the intended spot. A bright fat flash of light and a loud bang crashed into existence, as expected at the point of impact. Only 2 things remained after the blast. Blaziken, and a miniature mushroom cloud, the latter of which dissipated not long after, and the former of which was far enough away to take minimal splash damage. Pikachu, on the other hand, was too close to the blast, and had been launched sideways. May had feared for a moment after the lack of movement that he had been defeated in one shot like Eevee had been before, but after he shook off the dust in his coat and spat out the soil that he had swallowed, she wiped the nervous sweat from her brow and continued breathing. Since they were okay, Mel felt it was high time to get back on the offensive. Blaziken, use Flamethrower! She could almost hear Evergreen chuckling in her ear. Choosing a Fire-type attack against a Fire-type opponent? What an amateur, she imagined him say to her. She knew that it wasn't type advantageous, especially with the extrasensory ushering the flames away in an arc back towards the caster. It mattered to her regardless, because dealing damage wasn't her goal. Now Pikachu, go in for a Volt Tackle! Pikachu was eager, perhaps a tad too eager, to comply. His rage bubbled into a flare of sparks that completely enveloped his being. He dashed faster and faster through the floating embers, his claws beginning to burn from the rising friction. Pika, 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 Pika! The Ho-Oh was still reeling from the recoil and the empty sensation of sap's strength, too distracted to notice the yellow meteor hurling straight at it from below. With a strong kick, Pikachu leapt off the ground and let his momentum carry him upward like a speeding car flying off a ramp. He cruised skyward at a speed not unlike that of a kite caught in a gale. And soon, the only visible light to those on the ground was a golden ray careening closer and closer to the large bird. The collision that mattered followed not long after. Electricity surged through both combatants at an intensity that rivaled that of a sunrise or a violent storm. Either through momentum or electromagnetism, both Pokemon stayed suspended in the air as the energy released outward and struck almost anything in sight. May took a few steps back in fear that she would have been struck by a stray bolt herself if she wasn't careful, as well as to keep her from being blinded by the flash. Soon, the neon sign that was the Ho-Oh faded to nothing, and then the only light left was the odd ember from Blaziken's redirected flamethrower that still hadn't been extinguished. Both it and Pikachu were still in the air, as though time had stopped. May let out a few gasps of air when she realized that she had once again been holding her breath in anticipation, the only evidence she had that clock was in fact still ticking. But then from a distance, she heard a faint Pika, followed by a small yellow body falling to the ground like a stuffed animal. May's heart sank, and she could no longer regain her breath. She called out to him with the little air she had left in her lungs, not caring if the gesture was futile or not, although evidently it had been, as Pikachu's body eventually hit the mix of dust and glass in a heap, unmoving. "No, Pikachu!" she whispered, the unsettling feeling of despair closing in around her. It was short-lived, fortunately, when she saw his tiny form begin to stir, slow as it was. Dust and soot accumulated onto his fur after the impact, and evoked the peculiar impression that he had been thrown through a volcanic eruption in progress. But besides that, he pushed himself up like nothing had happened. At least, that's what she would have said to herself, were it not for his swaying and missed step, forcing him onto the ground once more. The attack had to have done more damage than she anticipated, she thought to herself. It was a risky move, to be sure, but little did she think that it would have done more damage to him than to the Ho-Oh. The latter, incidentally, was barely phased. Its eyes were still hollow and devoid of any semblance of agency, but there had been no sign of weakness either. May growled in frustration. "It's like we didn't even put a dent in him! Now what can we do?" Throwing out another Volt Tackle would have been a very dodgy choice, for obvious reasons. Not only would it have been another textbook example of telegraphing on her part, there was no telling if Pikachu could even use another one without taking serious damage or fainting altogether. Evergreen seized the opportunity to quip over her grumbles. "What can you do, indeed? If that's all the ideas you have left, then maybe you should take my advice after all. Go ahead, just send out another one of your Pokémon." May paused for a moment to apprehensively reconsider his offer. She still wasn't any more confident that she could command more than 2 Pokémon at a time, but the lack of firepower on her side was undeniable. She instinctively reached for Beautifly's Pokéball and almost began a throwing motion to bring her out to the field, but her discipline caught her at the last second. "No, I'm not gonna fall for his tricks." She shook her head to shake off the feeling of temptation and revisited her strategy, while giving Blaziken a command to dodge to the right to avoid a super effective extrasensory. She soon came to the conclusion that if she wanted to get to the vice controlling the Ho-Oh, like with Charizard before, it was only a matter of getting around to the back of his neck. The only question that remained was how she'd even be able to close the distance safely enough to get a clear shot. And then she had an idea, a crazy idea. "Blaziken, use Blaze Kick on Pikachu! Pikachu, run between Ho-Oh and Blaziken and use Iron Tail on the Blaze Kick!" Both Pokemon simply gawked at her, with their mouths ajar. Their opponent was just as nonplussed, to the point where the mere suggestion elicited laughter that was audible across the field. May held firm, however, and confidently repeated herself. The 2 Pokemon looked at each other hesitantly, but their fears were slightly relieved from the force of her determination. Blaziken, as instructed, built up a strong flame in her leg, while Pikachu, though reluctant, rushed at it with as much speed as he himself could gain, all the while building a charge in his tail in kind. When the two were within a couple meters of each other, Pikachu lunged and twisted around to maximize the torque in his tail, while a hot gust of wind blasted outward as Blaziken unleashed her attack. It was as though a loud gong had been struck, and the sound reverberated in May's ears and shook the loose shards of glass beneath her. The low, bass-filled note hung in the air and started spawning a headache, and so she brought her hands to her temples to try to numb the pain, or to at least distract her from it so she could concentrate on the yellow blur headed straight for the Ho-Oh. It was somewhat hard to see, not much different than if a baseball were flying out of a bar park, but it looked like it was working. Pikachu was flying straight for Ho-Oh's chest at a breakneck speed. Evergreen, as observant as he was, noticed the gambit and commanded the Pokemon to release yet another extrasensory. Just as planned. "Now, Blaziken, use Flamethrower on Ho-Oh!" A stream of fire shot out of Blaziken's beak once more, and then Evergreen realized he had been looking down not 1, but 2 gun barrels, both of which had fire roughly a couple seconds apart. And so there was but a moment to make a decision. Would he use extrasensory on Pikachu, or the Flamethrower? The former was closer, but the latter was traveling at twice the speed, and at its eyes, all but assuring that both would hit it simultaneously if swift action wasn't taken. It figured the Flamethrower would have done more damage to such a sensitive area, or unnecessarily cripple its senses, than an electronic than an electric mouse would. So there wasn't much to its calculus beyond redirecting the shot of flame away from its head at any cost. The purple aura enveloped the attack and safely guided it to the side, where it harmlessly struck a wall. In exchange, Ho-Oh had to completely ignore Pikachu, who landed in its chest feathers and grappled on for dear life. Little time did he have to even make sure he had a solid grip, and as envious as he was of himself in any alternate reality where it didn't feel like the rainbow-esque down was going to slip through his paws, he had to crawl as quickly as he could up to its neck just the same. After a few seconds, Pikachu wrapped himself around onto its back, much like he did with Charizard minutes before. And sure enough, the immediately recognizable hair-clip-like device stared at him dead in the face. This was his chance. He didn't bother spending precious time to hear May's command before acting, since it was all too likely that the rest of his strategy was the same as before anyway. He continued crawling up to the device, charged up energy in his tail, and swung down with all his might onto the dark metal. This device was just as brittle as the last, as it easily disintegrated with an oddly satisfying crunch. Shards of metal and wire rolled down the bird's plumes before gently landing on the sand below. But something was different this time. Instead of him plopping onto the ground, sound asleep, Ho-Oh screeched in pain, its vision dimming, but nevertheless no less enraged and focused on them. Perhaps it would have been too much to expect a Pokemon like Ho-Oh to succumb so easy to mental exhaustion after being under the influence of such a device like the others. May certainly didn't expect the contrary herself. She had hoped and even anticipated that the battle would have ended then and there, so she could finally answer the call of her body screaming at her for rest and relaxation. Plus, after all, worse than a mind-controlled demigod attacking them was one that was engulfed in fury. Fortunately, it was still reeling from the realization of what
I can't believe you've done this.
I can't believe I've done this either. Thank you, Yubi. Also, hi, Yubi. How are you doing? Fortunately, it was still reeling from the realization of what exactly had happened, and May still had one more trick up her sleeve. It was finally time to give that particular move a test drive. Before Ho-Oh got its bearings again, she ordered Pikachu to jump off and get out of the way before putting her attention back to her own Pokemon. And now, Blaziken, finish it off with Blast Burn! And then, all she could do was cross her fingers as she saw a familiar sight unfold in front of her, and see if the end result would diverge from the last. Blaziken's mouth opened, and in the empty space had a white-hot ball of light orange flames begun to form. It grew and grew until it was the size of a gumball, and then the size of a Pokeball, until finally it was the size of a Pokeball. Her head lurched forward, not dissimilar to a shotgun recoiling in reverse, and the ball of flame shot forward like a bullet of steel-melting plasma, once again towards the Ho-Oh's eyes. In the split second between the shot and the impact, a part of May twinged in fear that it would peter out before it reached its target, like it had the last time she had seen Blaziken attempt to use the move. But to her eventual relief, it never did. Fear turned to panic, turned to ecstasy, when a hot blast of bright red flashed in front of her where Ho-Oh had lingered. The smell of sulfur filled the air to mix with the amalgam of embers and burning feathers, and the screech of an avian monster that had lost its will to remain standing pierced her ears. Soon the embers and feathers were replaced with a whirlwind of dust, as the Pokemon had landed face first into the ground. She and Blaziken covered their mouths in a futile effort to keep their mouths clear. Their throats clear, taking the moment to cough and breathe whatever little clean air was left around them while they waited for the dust to settle. The intimidating Ho-Oh, brimming with bellicose energy, had become, in its place, a disheveled, unconscious beast. Feathers scorched and ruffled, eyes clamped shut, and breathing the only sign of movement. From there, it was clear. It had been defeated. The moment she realized that they were all still alive and no longer in peril of roasting on a spit felt almost like an eternity for her. The feeling was odd, yet similar enough to the sensation of adrenaline beginning to drain from one's system after an obvious danger had passed. Her fingers were tingling, and her breath had shortened, and dizziness had nearly brought her to her knees. The particulars weren't exactly pleasant, but she figured it was probably far preferable to the alternative. "Is everyone okay?" she eventually asked as soon as she was sure the dizziness wouldn't turn to nausea. Blaziken answered in the affirmative immediately, somewhat exhausted in the aftermath of the blast burn, but otherwise still fighting fit. Pikachu, besides his fur being slightly singed from the splash damage before, was in a similar state, and he happily chimed in response as well. From the other side, a man had been looking down at what seemed to him a pitiful sight, and shook his head in disgust at the camaraderie, but was, at the same time, partially impressed with her performance. She, a girl who fancied herself only in style and was charitably speaking and also ran in the art of Pokemon combat, had bested him, His plan was ruined because of this girl's tenacity. Well, no, not just that. She did have help from a motley band of friends and ne'er-do-wells alike. Especially regarding the latter, perhaps he was too hasty in his anger to discharge 3 longtime members from his ranks. Had he stayed his hand but a moment, she would have been a group short from reaching the facility's summit. Alas, in the end, he had only himself to blame. One could say, then, from a certain point of view, the only one to have truly dismantled his ambitions was the man in the suit all along. Congratulations, May, he said over the cheering and patting of backs, his spirit defeated. Surely you are the true champion of the Battle Fortress. May took a moment to stop herself from celebrating to address Evergreen properly. From where she was standing, he looked anything but the unhinged man from before. The uncontrollable rage and lack of decorum that brought her fear and anxiety had withered into what seemed like apathy, and it was that impression that had given her pause. So, is that it? It's over? It's over, he cried, his voice low and weary. No strings attached? None whatsoever. May let out what must have been her 12th sigh of relief that day, with Blaziken and Pikachu following suit. It seemed like a far-off dream where she could just rest and not have to worry about anything, and simply leave the heroics to others. The glimmer of light at the end of that long, dark tunnel filled with near death was almost bright enough to bring a tear to her eye. So then, May said, after realizing that she had dwelled on the idea of beaches and bed rest for so long that she feared Evergreen was about to topple over and fall asleep. What now? Are you going to run away? He thought about it for a moment. He admittedly hadn't given it much thought before, let alone prepare for the possibility he would have been on the receiving end of a defeat. The very idea just seemed asinine to him, like a rifleman losing to a man armed with only his fists. But these were truly extraordinary circumstances, and with all of his other options exhausted, there was little course he could take. I could do that, he finally said, after about a minute of pondering. I have the resources to quit while I'm ahead, spend the rest of my days inoffensively, out of the public eye. If I wanted, I could spend the rest of my days on an island somewhere, lay low until Team Rocket rose to global influence once again. But I'm not going to do that, he revealed, prompting a gasp of surprise from the others. Do you know the reality of the legally gray world, May? She shook her head, not quite understanding where he was headed. Not surprising, considering your meager age. Young people seem to cling to the fantasy that organizations like Team Rocket rise out of vacuum. That scrupulous men and women get together as to say, hello, friends and neighbors, let us do evil together. Without realizing that half of the work done comes in the form of forming relationships and favors outside of the organization. Each member rises and falls depending on the value and goodwill they contribute. And that willingness to do favors for another is like a special currency. To do all of what you've seen, I had to spend so much of it that no doubt the entire Kanto region knows about what's transpired here, and the failure to get any results. And so all that goodwill we've amassed has now run dry. May jolted when she felt herself begin to succumb to her exhaustion and nod off from Evergreen's sob story. Get to the point, man, she thought, trying to tap her foot to keep herself awake. Your actions this week have made us high profile, and surely no longer will key figures risk working with us by proxy without their reputations falling from heightened scrutiny. In fact, perhaps their reputations are already doomed. Expect corporations to fall, politicians to be recalled, private citizens to be arrested, and the authorities to comb the earth for those directly responsible. And all because of what you did. May rolled her eyes. She couldn't give much of a damn of what misfortune would fall upon those people after they themselves gave so little of it to others. Shouldering the blame was almost a badge of armor she wished she could cut out and paste onto her ribbon case. So to answer your question, no, I won't run. Because there's nowhere to run now. And I refuse to live as a fugitive. Feeling his story complete, and knowing that more of an explanation would only put May to sleep, he took out what she guessed would to be the same remote control device from before and pressed another button. A loud buzzer immediately filled the room, startling May and waking her up instantly. But all that resulted from it was the low guttural rumble from the doors opening from behind her. Alert, she spun around once again to face the rocket leader, concerned. You worry yourself, Evergreen assured her. I just want to see your comrades again. Or I figured you just want to see your comrades again. The gesture surprised May, honestly, but she wasn't going to complain or question it, given his recent speech. In her haste, she almost looked around and dashed out the door to meet her companions midway, but she stopped herself when she realized that she couldn't quite trust Evergreen's intentions. For all she knew, he was just trying to lull her into a false sense of security, only to escape with her eyes turned away. So, in lieu of rushing out, she resolved herself to stay. It would only be for a few more moments. She could wait. Unfortunately, she didn't have to wait long. Mere moments after the door had opened did she pick up the faint, distant sound of footsteps clanking on metal, which grew louder and louder still. Until finally, she could make out the visage of Greta and Annabelle rising from below. Annabelle's face brightened. Greta's face relieved when the two made eye contact for what felt like weeks. Their jaws dropped, amusingly enough from May's perspective, when they saw the heaping mass of the unconscious Hoa lying behind her. Oish, what happened here? Greta exclaimed with wide eyes. Do we miss a clash of titans here or what? I could say the same about you guys, May responded, between fits of laughter. How'd it go in there? We thrashed him! Greta explained, setting her fist into her palm through a manic grin. Serves that prissy fop right, I say. You mean after you ran up to him and punched him in the face when he knocked out your last Pokemon, right? Annabelle asked wryly. Shut up, Annie! She cried in protest, her face flushed with embarrassment. You still deserved it! May's fits of laughter continued as the other girls bickered playfully amongst themselves. It was almost like they never left, or rather, like she never left. As much as he wanted to enjoy their company after such a grueling flight, however, she knew they had to get back on track. So where are Tuckett and Brandon anyway? Annabelle took a moment to ignore the objections of her colleague to turn her attention to May. So after we did win, we figured it would have been better if we could keep an eye on them to make sure they didn't get away. Tucker was already out cold, needless to say. Greta, still clearly proud of himself, snickered loudly, which Annabelle ignored. But after the doors opened up, we took it upon ourselves to simply knock Brandon out too. They're still on the floor below us, sleeping like babies. Well, cool, May thought to herself. That was one less thing for her to worry about, but still left a handful of others. Have you seen everyone else? Annabelle shook her head. We want to make sure you were okay first. Sensing that the other girl was becoming consumed with worry, she smiled and gave her an assuring pat on the shoulder. Don't sweat it, though. I'm sure the others made it out fine as well. Yeah, May, don't sweat it, said a high-pitched girly voice behind them. And soon afterward, the forms of both Brock and Cindy ascended the stairs and rushed up to greet them. Brock, Cindy, you're all right! May exclaimed, trying as hard as she could to not tackle them with a hug. Just as enthusiastic, Brock gave her a supportive thumbs up. Of course we are! We weren't gonna go down without a fight! After he gave his justification for staying behind, May had honestly feared that him going down was a not too remote possibility, regardless of his post hoc assurances to the contrary. It was a close, tough match, but we won out in the end. She was so crazy, she was sloppy, Cindy chimed in. You had that battle in the bag. He laughed, still somewhat at his own expense despite the praise. Fair enough, but I'm sure she still would have done better if she were in a better mental state. Fact is, that battle must have been the straw that broke the camel's back, since she just fell to her knees in silence after we landed the final blow. Oh, is Lucy there now? May asked. Probably. She didn't move an inch afterward, let alone say a word. I just wanted to lock the lights out of I wanted to lock the lights out of her myself after Brock won just to keep her from running away, the younger girl added. But Brock said no! It's stupid. They had to respect her tenacity, but she was glad that Brock was there to put a check on it before things got even more out of hand. And then another voice followed. And then another voice followed. Ooh, what's stupid? No one's preparing for trouble without us, are they? And then a second. If they are, we'll just go ahead and make it double. May's eyes widened as the sight of three more figures walked up the stairs to greet them. She couldn't help but smile as to say typical, but she didn't have the heart to vocalize it and could only giggle and extend her feelings of relief of their well-being. Of course we're okay, Meow said with high spirits. You didn't think we'd have our hams handed us by that painful pair of palookas, did ya? May was impressed. So, you won? The thought was so surprising that she was honestly a little bit sad that she wasn't able to see it. We came, we saw, we conquered, James answered with a determined fist bump. Jessie followed with a mirrored fist bump of her own. And we had a lead so commanding it left us speechless versus our expert strategy and sharp wit.
Jess, all you did was call Cassidy's hair a greasy wig.
She stomped her feet in protest. Oh, be quiet, James! I've waited 11 years to be here and say that to her face, and you're not gonna ruin this moment for me! Fun fact, that's a reference to how much time was in between, the chapter between, the last one that PikamasterADV wrote and the first one that I wrote. The time between them was 11 years difference. Yeah. May was about to change the subject when she realized that Meowth had slipped behind them and exclaimed, "Ah, whoa, 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 hold the phone! What happened here?" Everyone turned their attention to the aftermath of the battle against Evergreen and marveled at the shattered glass littering the floor and the still unconscious Ho-Oh lying at the end. Did the toy pet actually punch out a legendary Pokemon by itself? What kind of power have you been hiding all this time? May didn't really have the confidence to answer that question, especially since it wasn't just her Pokemon that did the job. So all she could really do was give a modest shrug and say nothing, leaving it up to the other's imagination of whether or not her girlish charm had in fact belied the force of a typhoon.
And wait a moment, James said. If the twerp pet's here, where's the twerp?
Everyone looked around for a moment before spotting what looked to be Ash's corpse lying in the corner a ways from the field of glass and scorch marks, and rushed over to him, dreading the worst. May had assured the others that, no, he wasn't dead and was actually just in a deep sleep, but the rest still saw fit to check his pulse just to make sure. And sure enough, he was still resting soundly, if somewhat pained. Annabelle and Cindy caught on to his condition especially quickly. These symptoms look familiar, said the former. Was he being controlled psychically? Surely you know the answer to that one, Annabelle. Evergreen's voice said from behind him, spurring everyone to defensively spin on a dime and, in Greta's case, enter a defensive stance. Don't look so surprised, I'm still here. Boss! The Team Rocket trio shouted in surprise. It wasn't often that they got to see him face to face without any sort of screen protecting them from his wrath, although their surprise didn't connote a feeling of fear or even sympathy. Instead, it surprised the others to see the sight of him had saddened them or inflamed what was a once dormant feeling of frustration. And now, in the brighter lighting, they could see him for what he really was. A man who had given up on them and the rest of Team Rocket, and their scorn was all too apparent to the rest. Buffoons! He addressed in kind with a scowl. It certainly is bittersweet seeing you again. The glares from the trio didn't cease, and Meowth was having a difficult time staying his claw from ruining his suit. They turned their backs on him, as if to clear from their minds the image of the man who had sacked them, and the feeling of conflict in their hearts that pushed them back to his side. You refuse even to give me the time of day? You wound me. You insult us for thinking we'd give it to you after what you did to us! Meow snarled with ferocity that took even Jesse and James aback, although they still looked away. Sorry to voice your bubble, sir, but I, for one, refuse to crawl back to you! Is that so? You think of a place with them? The ones you've been harassing for years at my behest? Meowth faltered, unsure of himself. He was right that they'd probably had nowhere to go outside of Team Rocket. There was probably little chance the Taurus would let them tag along after all that's happened over the years, let alone just the past week or so, and the thought of living as wanderers was hardly a pleasant one. Perhaps it was their lot in life to perpetually belong nowhere. They do, they countered over the feeling of doubt that had clouded the trio. They turned to face her, and she had to admit that the resolve to defend them sort of came out of nowhere. Okay, yes, they did do horrible things to us and many other people in the past. Yes, they spent most of their careers failing to catch Pikachu, and yes, they did almost kill me. Okay, Torpet, we get the picture, Jessie said under her breath, but I ignored her. But if the past couple days have told me anything, it's that they're determined to turn over a new leaf. Why should I deny them that opportunity if they truly want to change? And what makes you think they're even telling the truth? You'd take former employees of mine at their word, especially when they betrayed you before. I mean, he's got a point, James whispered to himself, only for Jessie to smack him in the back of the head in irritation. May, once again, ignored them. Maybe you're right. But maybe you're wrong too. The way I see it, they'll be less likely to go back to a life of crime if they at least have support from people they know. So I'll take that risk. If I'm right, that means there are 3 fewer people working for you. Evergreen said nothing in response. Little on his face indicated whether or not he truly had nothing left to say, or if he simply didn't care enough to continue. Regardless, having the opportunity to shut down his smug attitude down was a simple enough pleasure to partake in, and the effect that it had on the former Team Rocket trio couldn't be denied. Tears flowed down their cheeks as they sobbed, touched at May's compassion. "Oh, Twerpet!" they cheered in unison, the waterworks practically spraying everywhere. "How can we ever repay you?" May was about to playfully answer with something cheeky like, say $1 million, and then laughed at their inevitable panic shock. But before she could, she was interrupted by the sound of stirring behind her. Her heart began beating faster when she spun around to see Ash turning himself onto his back and staring up at the ceiling, eyes half open. "Ash, you're awake!" she exclaimed, rushing over to him to offer her hand. "Can you get up this time?"
Yeah, I think so.
He took her hand with a smile and jolted up to his feet. Like before, he had trouble keeping his balance, but fortunately May was there to give him physical support, which he certainly wasn't going to object to. He enjoyed the softness of her touch, perhaps a little too much, because after a while, an impatient cough from one of the others, most likely Cindy, snapped out of the fantasy that the two were the only ones left in the room. "Oh, everyone," he said in embarrassed surprise. "When did you get here?" "Not too long ago," Rock replied, happy to see he was okay. "Welcome back, bud." Ash did his best to flash another one of his smiles back at him, but it was cut short when a migraine flash struck him in the head like a rock. He held his hand up to his temple and cried in pain, almost forgetting once more that anybody else was even there. Annabelle took the opportunity to rush to his side and place her hand on his forehead. It was cool and sweaty, doubtless due to the heat from the previous battle. It also confirmed her previous suspicions that he was mind-controlled recently, and the symptoms that resulted from it were all too apparent. "Just as I thought," she said out loud. "You're going to need plenty of rest, Ash." "Yeah, I guess so," he agreed. The pain from that particular headache didn't last too long that time to his delight, but almost like clockwork, a low grumble came from his stomach, which she cupped gingerly with a reddened face. "I guess I'm a little hungry too." "Then we'll be sure to give you a meal fit for a king. But until then," May said, followed soon after by letting go of Ash's hand and playfully pushing him away from her, to his confusion. "Let's make our way back to the Pokemon Center. Because you reek!" And that's it. That is the entire, well, not the entire thing, but that is all that that is all that I've planned on reading for today. And it ended about 20 minutes sooner than I was expecting. Huh, that's, that's a little unexpected, but, you know what? Cool. It means that people can actually go to bed and not have to fall asleep to this schlock, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like I said, it's not like a terrible cliffhanger of sorts. It's a good place to end it on. But, surely you're aware, though, that this is far from the end, though. Oh, no, there's still like 2.5 hours of reading left. But that's gonna have to happen in another stream. But when that happens, more lore drops! There's gonna be even more stuff. And then the actual conclusion. Brock plot armor for sure. Is it really plot armor if she just had a bad mentality? Because seriously though, in competitive anything, mentality is huge. If you have a bad mentality, you're going to make really bad decisions. So, I feel like my explanation is I feel like my explanation works. Also, thank you for thank you for laughing at that joke, even though I had to explain it to people. Although y'all wouldn't have noticed. Y'all wouldn't have known because you're not actually reading it. It's being read aloud to you. As if this is all, like, one story, you know? But yes, if you compared the two, you would have noticed. Yeah, there was an 11-year gap between the two. And it was I couldn't resist. Team Rocket is known for leaning on the fourth wall, so I absolutely wanted to do that. Oh, it's not slop at all. This is phenomenal. Woohoo! Okay, well, all right. I do like that you like it a lot. That is true, but she's one of the most lethal frontier brains. So her having bad mentality, valid as it was, definitely has plot armor. But also bear in mind that her Milotic did also take a strong Thunderbolt as well earlier. And I think I did imply that she didn't actually go to the Pokemon Center afterwards. Like, she probably just landed. My headcanon is that she just landed in the front lawn of the Battle Fortress, and Giovanni was like, oh, Lucy. What am I gonna do with you? But yes, I mean, yeah, she did have the type advantage. For sure. But also bear in mind that he has more than just Steelix, too. Remember, the Battle Fortress doesn't really have rules, per se, so... You could have used other Pokemon as well, and in fact, he likely did, because, you know, Steelix, probably not going to last against that Milotic. Yeah, they live on the fourth wall. They live on it. They loiter against it so much that it's basically their stoop at this point. Isn't that also plot armor? I mean, I guess you could say anything that's convenient for the plot is plot armor. You could argue that. But it's not a Deus Ex Machina, at least. There is a justification for it, and, well, I mean... But yeah, honestly, I'm still just gonna chalk it up to the fact that she was just not all there. In the slightest. Plus, who knows? Maybe Brock could have, like, pretended to put moves on her to distract her as well. I mean, I could see that working. And of course, also don't forget that Cindy was there too, and she did have Skarmory. But I think the implication was that she didn't actually participate. Because she specifically said, you had that battle in the bag. Although I do kind of regret not having her... Not implying that she was actually part of that fight, because, like I said, she wanted to beat her... She wanted to smash her face with an iron! Or a steel wing, you know. Yep, that is true. So yeah, there might have also been some elements of throwing the fight too, which I actually didn't really think of. So, you know, it's always fun. But regardless, it's not really a detail that I thought was important to expand upon, so I didn't really do that. It would have just distracted from the overall story, so... And considering how long this thing actually was so far, like, never mind, I read 3 chapters tonight. And this has been like a 3-hour stream. Well, nearly 3 hours. Like, I'm already writing a lot. And the next 2 chapters aren't really going to be slow either, aren't really going to be short either. They're also going to be about an hour length each. So, yeah. I think that is a good place to end it. Finally, we're ending early? We're ending before the fireplace video, like, ends and post-roll ads play? That's crazy. That's absolutely crazy, man. Okay. So that is all I'm going to stream for today. How about we find a rage target? Just streaming that I want to. Ooh. I'll rate Shay. I've not rated her in forever. She's an awesome bean. Thanks for the stream. Thank you for showing up, Aiden. This was awesome as always. I'm glad that you're enjoying this. I'm glad that you're enjoying this. And now we get to see the end of the story next time. So you know. We get to see how it ends. And it may not exactly end as you expect, actually. Which gives me, you know, more potential for an epilogue of sorts, which, I have always thought of possibly doing. Like, I haven't really turned down the idea, but now I, kind of have some ideas floating about how I could even do one. Maybe a sequel series, even. We'll see. You have since the very first one on Halloween? Oh yeah, thank you, Aiden. I do appreciate it. I love that people. I love that y'all are liking this. I just really enjoy reading this out and setting up a soundtrack for it. I love it. I love it. But yeah, so anyway, next time on Mochi Storytime, we will read the last 3 chapters? No, 2 chapters. And finally conclude the saga. See you then, everybody. Take care.